In the heart of Manhattan, where power is measured in billions and secrets are buried beneath steel and glass, a single moment of recognition is about to shatter two lives. A billionaire will drop his glass, a waitress will lose her job, and a 20-year-old mystery will begin to unravel, one crescent moon at a time. The morning of November 18th began like every other morning in Lily Carter's small Astoria apartment. The alarm clock screamed at 5:30, but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling in the gray pre-dawn light. Sleep had been difficult lately. Her mother's last dialysis session had not gone well, and the weight of unpaid medical bills sat on Lily's chest like a physical thing. She rose from bed without disturbing the silence, bare feet padding across the cold linoleum floor to the bathroom. The face in the mirror was 25 years old today, though it felt older. Green eyes stared back at her, searching for something they had never found. Dark hair fell past her shoulders, and her skin held the pallor of someone who worked too many night shifts under fluorescent lights. As she washed her face, her sleeve rode up, exposing the birthmark on her inner left wrist. It was always there, of course. A perfect crescent moon in deep crimson, with a tiny dot nestled in its curve like a solitary star. She had carried this mark for as long as she could remember, which was not very long at all. Her earliest memory was not of a mother or father, but of cold linoleum floors in a place called St. Margaret's Foundling Home in Brooklyn. Lily traced the birthmark with her finger, a habit she had developed in childhood. The other kids at the orphanage had called her Moon Girl, Alien Mark, Freak. But Grace Carter, the woman who would become her adoptive mother, had looked at the same mark and said something different. She had said it made Lily special. She had said God kissed her wrist and left a beauty mark. The apartment was quiet except for the distant rumble of the subway beneath the streets. Lily made coffee in the small kitchen, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot with the patience of someone who had learned to find peace in small rituals. Today was her birthday. 25 years of existence, and she still had no idea who she had been for the first years of her life. The bedroom door opened, and Grace appeared in the doorway, moving slowly. She was 58 years old, but looked older, her body worn down by 3 years of chronic kidney failure. Her face was drawn, her skin carrying the grayish tint that came from toxins the dialysis could not fully remove. But when she saw Lily standing in the kitchen, Grace smiled. That's what mothers do, Lily thought. They smile even when they are dying. Grace moved to the stove with careful steps, her hand steadying herself against the counter. She had already laid out the ingredients for pancakes: flour, eggs, milk, a small bottle of vanilla extract. It was their tradition, started on Lily's 7th birthday and maintained every year since. No matter what else was happening, Grace made birthday pancakes. You should be resting, Lily said, moving to help her mother into a chair. Grace waved her off with gentle stubbornness. Resting is for when I'm dead, she said. Today is for celebrating you. They worked together in comfortable silence, Grace directing from her chair while Lily mixed the batter. The apartment filled with the smell of butter and vanilla, and for a moment, the weight of medical debt and uncertain futures lifted. This was family. This was home. Not the answers Lily had spent her whole life seeking, but the love she had been given instead. Grace produced a small wrapped package from her robe pocket. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it out. Lily unwrapped it carefully, revealing a leather-bound journal with blank pages. Inside the front cover, Grace had written in her careful handwriting, "For the stories you'll write when you finally know yours. Love, the luckiest mom in the world." Lily's throat tightened. She sat down beside Grace and took her mother's frail hand. "Mom," she whispered. "Whatever happens," Grace said, her voice quiet but firm, "you're my daughter, not because of blood or birth certificates or any piece of paper, because I chose you, and you chose me back. That's what makes family real." They sat together as the morning light crept through the window. Two women bound not by genetics, but by years of shared struggle and unconditional love. Lily thought about the birthmark on her wrist, about the questions that had haunted her since childhood. Who had she been before Grace found her? Why had she been abandoned? Did someone out there remember her? But looking at Grace's tired face, at the woman who had sacrificed everything to give Lily a life, those questions felt less important than they once had. Maybe not knowing was its own kind of answer. Maybe the family you chose mattered more than the family you lost. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the moment. The screen lit up with messages from a group chat called the Golden Girls. These were her co-workers from the restaurant, the other women who worked the floor at the Golden Heron. Carmen, the head waitress who had taught Lily everything about navigating the demands of wealthy customers. Yuki, the pastry chef from Osaka who believed in signs and fate. Shanice, the hostess and grandmother who served as the unofficial mother figure to every young server who walked through the door. "Happy birthday, honey," Carmen had written. "Drinks after shift tonight. My treat." "Made your favorite matcha cake," Yuki added. "See you tonight." "Quarter century looking good on you, baby," Shanice wrote. "Proud of you." Lily smiled at the messages. These women knew she worked 3 jobs to pay for her mother's medical care. They knew she rarely took nights off. They knew she was drowning in debt. And they loved her anyway, in the fierce, protective way that service workers love their own. In a city of 8 million people, Lily had found 4 who made her feel less alone. The restaurant was already bustling when Lily arrived for the lunch shift. The Golden Heron occupied the 64th floor of a glass tower in Midtown, offering panoramic views of Manhattan to clients who could afford $300 steaks. The dining room was all polished marble and soft lighting, designed to make the wealthy feel sophisticated and the servers feel invisible. Lily changed into her uniform in the staff room, a crisp white shirt and black slacks that had been pressed so many times the creases could cut paper. She tied her hair back in a tight bun and checked her reflection one last time. The mask of professional neutrality settled over her features. This was how you survived in service. You became whatever the customer needed you to be: efficient, unobtrusive, forgettable. Carmen was already in the dining room, reviewing the reservation list with the kind of military precision that made her the best head waitress in Manhattan. She looked up when Lily entered, and her stern expression softened into a smile. "Birthday girl," Carmen said, pulling Lily into a quick hug. "You ready for tonight?" Before Lily could answer, Yuki appeared with a small box. Inside was a perfect slice of matcha cake, decorated with delicate sugar flowers. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each petal rendered in precise detail. Yuki had a gift for making beautiful things, even in the chaos of a professional kitchen. "For good luck," Yuki said in her careful English. "Make wish." Lily closed her eyes for a moment. She did not wish for money, though they desperately needed it. She did not wish for answers about her past, though they haunted her. She wished only for more time with Grace, more mornings making pancakes, more quiet moments in their small apartment, more proof that chosen family could be enough. When she opened her eyes, Shanice was watching her with the knowing expression of someone who had raised children and buried husbands, and survived every tragedy life could throw at a person. The older woman reached out and squeezed Lily's hand. "God got plans for you, child," Shanice said. "I can feel it. Something big coming." Lily wanted to believe her, but in her experience, the only things that came were bills and bad news and the slow, inevitable march toward loss. The lunch service was routine until Robert Hayes, the restaurant manager, called an emergency staff meeting. He was a thin, nervous man who wore anxiety like an expensive cologne. His hands fluttered as he spoke, never quite settling anywhere. "We have a VIP reservation tonight," he announced. "Private dining room on the 64th floor. Jonathan Blackwood and his business partner from Tokyo. They are finalizing an $8.7 billion acquisition." A murmur went through the assembled servers. Jonathan Blackwood was a legend in New York business circles. At 34, he had built Blackwood Global Industries into one of the most powerful conglomerates in the world. He was brilliant, ruthless, and notoriously private. The tabloids called him the Ice King. "Everything must be perfect," Robert continued, his voice rising with stress. "Lily, you will handle their table. You are our best." Carmen squeezed Lily's shoulder. "You got this, honey," she whispered. But as Lily returned to her prep work, a strange unease settled over her. She had served countless billionaires in her 3 years at the Golden Heron. They were all the same: entitled, impatient, treating servers like furniture. This would be no different. Jonathan Blackwood was just another rich man who did not see people like her as fully human. She had no way of knowing that in a few hours one accidental moment would crack open both their carefully constructed lives and reveal the terrible, beautiful truth that had been buried for 20 years. The private dining room at the Golden Heron was a study in understated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan that made the city look like a glittering toy. The table was set with crystal that caught the light like diamonds, each piece probably worth more than Lily made in a month. The air smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. Jonathan Blackwood sat at the head of the table with the kind of stillness that marked apex predators. He was tall and lean, his Tom Ford suit fitting like a second skin. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp enough to draw blood. But it was his eyes that made Lily pause when she first entered the room. They were gray, the color of a winter storm, and they held a depth of old pain that no amount of wealth could erase. Across from him sat Hiroshi Nakamura, a Japanese tech mogul whose company represented the final piece in Blackwood's empire building. They were discussing market projections and synergies, their voices low and controlled. These were men accustomed to power, to having the world bend to their will. Lily approached the table with practiced grace, her movements designed to be noticed only when necessary. She set down appetizer plates without interrupting their conversation, becoming part of the background like expensive wallpaper. Her feet ached from standing for 7 hours already. Her mind drifted to Grace's next dialysis appointment, to the stack of bills on their kitchen counter, to the impossible weight of trying to save someone you loved with money you did not have. She reached for Jonathan Blackwood's plate to clear it. The scallops had barely been touched. Rich people always wasted food, treating five-star cuisine like it meant nothing. Her sleeve caught on the edge of the plate as she lifted it. For one terrible second, she felt the fabric slide up her wrist. The birthmark was exposed. She saw Jonathan Blackwood's eyes move to her wrist, saw them focus on the crescent moon and its single star, saw something change in his face that she would remember for the rest of her life. The mask of the billionaire CEO cracked, and beneath it was something raw and desperate and impossibly fragile. The color drained from his face as if someone had pulled a plug. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. His hand, which had been holding a glass of Yamazaki whiskey, began to tremble. Not a small tremor, a violent shaking that ran through his entire body like an earthquake. The glass slipped from his fingers. Time seemed to fracture. Lily watched the crystal tumble through the air, watched the amber liquid arc outward in a perfect spray, watched the whole scene unfold with the strange clarity that comes in moments of crisis. The glass struck the marble floor and exploded. The sound was not a crash, but a detonation that ripped through the restaurant's hushed reverence. Every head in the dining room turned. Hiroshi Nakamura jerked back, whiskey spattering across his expensive tie. Other servers froze mid-stride. Robert Hayes materialized from nowhere, his face pale with panic. But Lily could not look away from Jonathan Blackwood's face. He was staring at her wrist with an intensity that felt like it was peeling away her skin, her bones, her very soul. His chest heaved as if he could not get enough air. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. And then he spoke. A single word, barely more than a breath, but it carried the weight of 2 decades of grief. Emma. The name hung in the air between them. Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. She did not know anyone named Emma. She had no connection to that name. But something in the way he said it, with such desperate hope and terrible pain, made her chest tighten. "Who is Emma?" she wanted to ask. "Why are you looking at me like I'm a ghost?" But Robert Hayes was already there, apologizing frantically, snapping at other servers to clean up the mess. Lily pulled her sleeve down over the birthmark and backed away from the table. Her professional mask had shattered along with the glass. She felt naked, exposed, like this stranger had seen something in her that she did not understand herself. Jonathan Blackwood pushed back from the table with such force his chair nearly toppled. He stood abruptly, towering and trembling, and for a moment Lily thought he might reach for her. His eyes held hers, searching, pleading, demanding answers she did not have. Then he turned and walked out of the private dining room without a word. No apology to Hiroshi Nakamura. No acknowledgement of the scene he had caused. He simply left, moving like a man who had seen the dead rise and did not know whether to run toward them or away. In the staff room 20 minutes later, Lily sat on a metal folding chair with her head in her hands. Her body was still shaking. Carmen stood beside her, one hand on Lily's shoulder, radiating protective fury. "That man is crazy," Carmen said. "You didn't do anything wrong, mija. These billionaires, they think they own the world." But Yuki, who had come down from the kitchen, looked thoughtful. She sat across from Lily and spoke in her careful, measured way. "He saw something," Yuki said. "In your mark. Something important." Lily pulled up her sleeve and stared at the crescent moon on her wrist. It was just a birthmark. A random arrangement of pigment cells that happened to look like something meaningful. Millions of people had birthmarks. It could not possibly mean anything. But then she remembered the way Jonathan Blackwood had whispered that name. Emma. Like it was sacred. Like it was the answer to a question he had been asking for his entire life. Shanice appeared at the doorway, and her face told Lily everything she needed to know before the older woman spoke. "Robert wants to see you," Shanice said quietly. "I'm sorry, baby." The firing took less than 5 minutes. Robert Hayes could barely look at her as he explained. Jonathan Blackwood was their most important client. His company held events at the Golden Heron 3 times a week. The incident, while not Lily's fault, had been deeply disturbing. Mr. Blackwood's representatives had called and requested that Lily be removed from service immediately. Robert slid an envelope across his desk. 2-week severance pay, $840. Lily stared at the money and thought about Grace's dialysis copay, due in 3 days. Thought about the transplant surgery that cost more than she would make in 5 years. Thought about how you could work 3 jobs and still never be able to save the person you loved most. She took the envelope without arguing. What was the point? Men like Jonathan Blackwood did not have their lives disrupted by people like her. She was disposable, forgettable, nothing. Except he had looked at her like she was everything. The afternoon light was fading when Lily left the hospital after visiting Grace. The dialysis session had gone poorly again. Grace's numbers were getting worse. The doctor had pulled Lily aside and spoken in the careful euphemisms that medical professionals use to discuss death without saying the word. "Your mother needs a transplant within 6 months," the doctor had said. "Without it, her kidney function will continue to decline." "How much?" Lily had asked, though she already knew. "With surgery and postoperative care, approximately $380,000. Lily had thanked the doctor and walked to Grace's bedside and held her mother's hand and lied about everything being fine. Grace, even weakened by treatment, had seen through the lie. She always did. "You can't save the world, baby," Grace had whispered. "Sometimes you just have to let things unfold as they will." But Lily refused to accept that. Grace had saved her when she was a nameless child with no past and no future. Grace had chosen her when she had every reason not to. Grace had been 35 years old and newly divorced when she first volunteered at St. Margaret's. Her ex-husband had left her for a younger woman who could give him the children Grace's body refused to produce. 10 years of fertility treatments and failed pregnancies had ended with divorce papers and a broken heart. Grace could have turned bitter, could have let that rejection define her. Instead, she had walked into an orphanage on a gray Saturday morning and met a little girl with tangled hair and a strange birthmark. The record said the child was approximately 4 years old, though the nun suspected she might have been older. Severe malnutrition and what appeared to be trauma had made accurate age assessment nearly impossible. The child had been found wandering alone near a Brooklyn subway station, unable or unwilling to speak, with no identification except a name someone had written on a scrap of paper pinned to her shirt: Lily. That little girl had looked up at Grace and asked a question that changed both their lives. "Are you my mama?" Grace had not planned to say yes, had not planned to foster anyone, but something in those green eyes had called to something broken inside her, and she had answered with the only word that mattered: yes. The adoption had taken 2 years to finalize, 2 years of home visits and background checks and social workers questioning whether a single woman with a seamstress income could provide properly for a child. Grace had worked double shifts at the garment factory, had sold her wedding ring to pay the legal fees, had fought every bureaucrat who suggested Lily might be better off with a traditional 2-parent family. And when the judge finally signed the papers, making Lily Carter her legal daughter, Grace had cried tears of joy and relief and exhausted triumph. That was the woman lying in a dialysis chair 3 times a week. The woman who had fought for Lily when no one else would. The least Lily could do was fight back with everything she had to return that gift. She was thinking about this, about impossible amounts of money, and the cruelty of a system that put price tags on human lives. When the man approached her on the street, he was tall and carried himself with military precision. His face was calm, his eyes alert, but not threatening. He wore a simple dark suit that somehow communicated competence and control. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Ms. Lily Carter?" Lily stopped walking. Her first instinct was fear, a strange man knowing her name on a darkening street. But something about his demeanor made her pause. This was not a threat. This was something else. "Who's asking?" she said, keeping her voice steady. "My name is Daniel Cross. I represent Jonathan Blackwood." He held up an ID badge, head of security, Blackwood Global Industries. The last person Lily wanted to discuss was the man who had gotten her fired. She moved to walk past him, but Daniel stepped smoothly into her path. "Please," he said, "just 5 minutes. I promise I'm not here to intimidate you or cause trouble. I'm here because Mr. Blackwood would like to make amends." Lily laughed, a bitter sound. "Amends? He got me fired. What kind of amends could possibly make up for that?" Daniel gestured to a diner across the street, its windows glowing with warm light. The place looked safe, populated, the kind of spot where nothing bad could happen. "There is a coffee shop, public, well lit. Just hear me out." Against every instinct screaming at her to walk away, Lily agreed. They sat in a corner booth. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, made brief eye contact with Lily. A silent question. "Are you okay?" Lily nodded slightly, and the waitress relaxed but stayed watchful. Daniel Cross ordered coffee for both of them and waited until the cups arrived before speaking. When he did, his voice carried a weight of personal experience that made Lily listen despite herself. "Ms. Carter, before I explain Mr. Blackwood's offer, I need to tell you something about myself. 20 years ago, I lost my younger sister. We were in foster care. The system separated us. I spent 15 years looking for her." He paused, and real pain flickered across his carefully controlled features. 3 years ago, Mr. Blackwood helped me find her. He funded a private investigator when I had given up hope. Because of him, I was reunited with my sister after 2 decades apart. He understands what it means to lose family. Lily felt her defenses soften slightly. That kind of loss was something she understood intimately, even if her loss was different. She had never had family to lose because she had never known who they were in the first place. Daniel continued. 20 years ago, Mr. Blackwood's parents were killed in a car accident. His 5-year-old sister disappeared from the crash site. Emma. She was never found. The investigation went cold. For 2 decades, he has searched for her. Lily's heart began to beat faster. The name, Emma. The same name Jonathan Blackwood had whispered when he saw her birthmark. Emma had a very distinctive birthmark, Daniel said, his eyes meeting Lily's. A crescent moon on her inner left wrist, with a small dot inside the curve, like a star. The world tilted. Lily pulled up her sleeve slowly, exposing the mark. Daniel's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Confirmation. "When Mr. Blackwood saw your birthmark tonight, he thought you might be his sister. He needs to know. One way or another, he needs closure." Lily stared at the mark on her wrist. The mark that had made her a target for childhood bullies. The mark that Grace said made her special. Could it really be the answer to someone else's 2-decade search? "I'm not his sister," Lily said. "The timing doesn't work. I was found in Brooklyn, not Connecticut. The records say I was about 4 years old when Grace adopted me, though the nuns who found me thought I might have been older. I was severely malnourished, couldn't speak. They had no way to know my real age or where I came from. It's impossible." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Maybe it is impossible, but maybe it's not. The only way to know for certain is through a DNA test. Mr. Blackwood is prepared to offer you $250,000 for your cooperation. A simple cheek swab. The money would be placed in escrow immediately and released regardless of the test results. $250,000. The number echoed in Lily's mind. That was more than half of what Grace needed for her transplant. Combined with what Lily had saved, it would cover the surgery and most of the aftercare. "Why so much?" Lily asked. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Mr. Blackwood is a wealthy man and he needs to know if you are his sister. The money is compensation for your cooperation and for any distress this situation has caused you." Lily wanted to refuse, wanted to tell this man and his billionaire boss to leave her alone. But she thought about Grace hooked up to the dialysis machine, thought about the doctor's careful warning about 6 months, thought about how you could not put a price on a mother's life, but apparently you could. If the test is negative, Lily said slowly, what happens then? Then Mr. Blackwood will have his closure. You will have financial security, and you can both move forward with your lives. And if it is positive? Daniel's expression softened. Then you'll have found the family you have been looking for your whole life. Lily sat in silence for a long moment. The diner hummed with conversation around them. The waitress refilled coffee cups. The city moved on outside the windows, indifferent to the decision being made in this corner booth. Finally, Lily spoke. I'll do it. But the money goes to my mother's medical care first. She needs a kidney transplant. Without it, she will die. So if this helps some billionaire sleep at night, fine. But I'm doing it for her, not for him. Daniel nodded. Of course, we will set up the escrow account in the morning. The sample collection can happen tomorrow afternoon if that works for you. He pulled out a tablet and showed her the preliminary paperwork. Everything was legitimate. Everything was clear. $250,000 for a cheek swab, and the possibility of answers she had stopped hoping for years ago. As Daniel walked her to the subway afterward, Lily felt the weight of the decision settle over her. She had just agreed to sell a piece of herself for money, but if that piece of herself could save Grace, then it was worth it. Family was worth anything. She just did not know yet that she was about to discover she had more family than she ever imagined. Jonathan Blackwood sat alone in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. The space was 5,200 square feet of minimalist luxury. Black marble floors, modern art that cost more than most people's houses, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city that never slept. But tonight, John was not looking at the view. He was staring at a photograph in a silver frame. The picture was 20 years old, the color slightly faded. It showed a family of 4 on a summer day. His father, Michael Blackwood, tall and commanding even in casual clothes. His mother, Catherine, beautiful and warm, her arm around her husband. John himself at age 14, already serious beyond his years. And Emma, 5-year-old Emma with blonde curls and a gap-toothed smile, holding a stuffed teddy bear. In the photo, Emma's wrist was visible. The crescent moon birthmark caught the sunlight, looking almost luminous. John's hand trembled as he touched the glass over Emma's face. He had looked at this photo thousands of times in the past 20 years. It was the last picture taken of his family before the accident. 3 days after this photo was taken, his parents would be dead and Emma would be gone. He remembered the crash in fragments that haunted his dreams. The rain had been relentless that October night, turning the Connecticut highway into a river of black water. They were returning from his grandparents' estate, the car warm and filled with the comfortable silence of a family at peace. John had been in the front passenger seat, arguing with his father about some teenage grievance he could no longer remember. His mother had been in the back with Emma, humming a lullaby that only she knew. Emma had fallen asleep with her teddy bear clutched to her chest, her blonde curls pressed against the window. The headlights came from nowhere, blinding white light that turned the rain into diamonds. His father had screamed and jerked the wheel. The truck, massive and unstoppable, had been in their lane. Whether the driver was drunk or asleep or simply careless, John would never know. The impact was not a single moment, but a symphony of destruction. Metal screaming, glass exploding. His mother's scream cutting off mid-sound, the world flipping over and over until up and down lost all meaning. When the spinning stopped, John was hanging upside down from his seatbelt, blood in his mouth and fire in his lungs. The car had come to rest on its roof in a ditch. Rain poured through the shattered windshield. The smell of gasoline made his eyes water. He had tried to call out, but his voice was gone. He had looked to his left and seen his father slumped over the steering wheel, still and silent in a way that John's 14-year-old mind could not process. He had unbuckled himself and fallen to the crumpled roof. Every movement was agony. His ribs were broken. His left arm hung at a wrong angle, but he had crawled over broken glass and twisted metal to reach the back seat. His mother's eyes were open but unseeing. Emma's car seat was empty. The rear door had been torn completely off its hinges. 30 feet away, illuminated by the car's dying headlights, Emma's teddy bear lay face down in the mud. John had screamed then, had screamed until his throat was raw and his voice was nothing but a rasp. The first responders had arrived to find him trying to crawl out of the wreckage, calling for his baby sister over and over. They had pulled him back, had sedated him, had loaded him into an ambulance, while police officers searched the crash site with flashlights. Emma Blackwood was never found. Not that night, not in the days and weeks and years that followed. The police investigation had been massive, fueled by the Blackwood family's immense wealth and influence. They theorized that in the chaotic aftermath, a passerby might have pulled her from the wreckage before the first responders arrived. A kidnapping for ransom was the leading theory. But there was never a call, never a demand. It was as if Emma Blackwood had evaporated into the rain-soaked night. The search consumed Alexander's uncle, Victor Blackwood, his father's younger brother, who became John's legal guardian. It consumed the family fortune. Private investigators chased down hundreds of dead ends, from supposed sightings in distant states to cruel hoaxes by heartless opportunists. For years, every blonde girl on the street would make John's heart seize in his chest. Eventually, the world moved on. The investigators filed their final inconclusive reports. Victor declared that for John's sake, they had to accept the tragedy and look to the future. But John never did. He channeled his grief, his rage, his guilt into building an empire. Blackwood Global became his obsession, a monument of steel and glass built on a foundation of loss. Each acquisition, each victory, was a distraction from the hollow ache in his soul. He had everything a man could want, and he had nothing that mattered. Now this waitress, Lily Carter. He stood at his obsidian desk. If she was Emma, she would have no memory of him, would be a stranger, frightened and overwhelmed. If she was a fraud, a direct confrontation would only give her ammunition. His phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. She agreed to the DNA test. Sample collection tomorrow. Results in 48 to 72 hours. John's breath caught. 48 hours. In 2 days, he would either be reunited with the only family he had left, or he would have to bury Emma all over again. Both possibilities terrified him equally. He thought about the vow he had made as a 9-year-old boy holding his newborn sister in the hospital. I will protect you always. He had broken that vow on a rainy October night 20 years ago. If Lily Carter was Emma, it meant she had spent 2 decades alone, abandoned, growing up without knowing she had a brother who never stopped searching for her. And if she was not Emma, then his sister was truly gone. All those years of hoping, of searching, of refusing to give up would have been for nothing. John stood and walked to the window. The city glittered below him, 8 million lives moving through their own dramas and tragedies. Somewhere out there, a woman with his sister's birthmark was preparing to take a DNA test that would answer the question that had haunted him for half his life. In 48 hours, he would know the truth. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and allowed himself, for the first time in 20 years, to hope. It was the most dangerous thing he had done since building his empire. Hope could heal, but it could also destroy. Please, he whispered to the empty penthouse, to the ghost of his parents, to whatever force in the universe might be listening. Please let it be her. Across the city, in a modest Astoria apartment, Lily sat on the edge of her bed holding the journal Grace had given her that morning. The blank pages seemed to ask a question. What story will you write? She thought about the birthmark on her wrist, about a man who had looked at her like she was the answer to a prayer, about $250,000 that could save Grace's life, about the possibility, however remote, that she might finally learn where she came from. Grace appeared in the doorway, moving slowly. She sat beside Lily on the bed and took her daughter's hand. You are thinking too loud, Grace said with a gentle smile. I can hear it from the other room. Lily told her everything. The restaurant incident, Daniel Cross's offer, the DNA test, the money, the impossible possibility that she might be related to Jonathan Blackwood. Grace listened without interrupting. When Lily finished, the older woman was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Grace spoke. Do you want to know, baby? Do you want to find out if you are his sister? Lily considered the question honestly. Part of her did want to know. wanted to finally have answers about where she came from. But another part was terrified. What if she found out she was someone else? What if Emma Blackwood had a whole history and identity that had nothing to do with Lily Carter? I don't know, Lily admitted. I have spent my whole life not knowing who I was. And you made me feel like that was okay. Like I did not need a past to have a future. What if finding out changes everything? Grace squeezed her hand. Listen to me. No matter what that test says, you are my daughter. You are Lily Carter. You are the girl who worked 3 jobs to pay for my medical care. You are the woman who chose kindness over bitterness even when life was unfair. Those things don't change because of DNA. But what if I am Emma Blackwood? What if I have a whole family I never knew about? Then you will have more people to love, Grace said simply. Love does not divide, it multiplies. If this man is your brother, you don't lose me, you gain him. Family is not a competition. It is a circle that grows bigger the more people you let in. Lily felt tears slip down her cheeks. She leaned into Grace's embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and soap that had meant safety for as long as she could remember. Okay, Lily whispered. I will do it. I will take the test, and whatever it says, we will deal with it together. As they sat together in the quiet apartment, neither of them knew that across town, a man named Victor Blackwood was making a phone call that would bury the truth before it could surface. Neither of them knew that the DNA test results would be a lie. Neither of them knew that the simple act of looking for answers would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of the Blackwood Empire. All they knew was that tomorrow, Lily would give a sample of her DNA, and in 2 days, they would learn if she belonged to someone else. But belonging, Grace had taught her, was not about blood. It was about choice. It was about showing up every day and deciding to love someone even when it was hard. It was about being chosen and choosing back. Lily touched the birthmark on her wrist one more time before turning off the light. The crescent moon and its tiny star glowed faintly in the darkness, a map to a place she had never been. Tomorrow she would take the first step on a journey to discover if that map led home. She did not know yet that home was not a place you found. It was a place you built with the people who refused to let you face the darkness alone. And she had no idea that the biggest darkness was still ahead, waiting in the form of a falsified lab report and a man who would do anything to keep his secrets buried. Science does not lie. Genetics have no agenda. A DNA test is binary, yes or no, match or no match, truth or fiction. But science is performed by humans. And humans lie all the time, especially when they have 36 million reasons to. The private clinic on the Upper East Side was the kind of place that catered to people who valued discretion over decor. No waiting room full of outdated magazines, no receptionist making small talk, just a quiet entrance, a single hallway, and examination rooms that promised absolute confidentiality. The wealthy came here for drug tests they needed to pass, paternity tests they needed to contest, and medical procedures they needed to hide. Lily arrived at 9 in the morning, exactly on time. Daniel Cross was waiting in the small lobby, his presence somehow making the sterile space feel even more controlled. He nodded when he saw her and gestured to a door marked Collection Room 3. The nurse who greeted them was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient hands. She wore scrubs that were perfectly pressed and a name tag that read Margaret. She took one look at Lily's nervous expression and offered a gentle smile. "This will only take a moment, honey," Margaret said. "Simple cheek swab, no needles, no pain." Lily sat in the examination chair while Margaret prepared the collection kit. The room smelled of antiseptic and vanilla air freshener, a combination that made Lily's stomach turn. She watched as Margaret broke the seal on a sterile swab, her movements practiced and sure. "Open wide," Margaret instructed. The swab scraped against the inside of Lily's cheek for 15 seconds. 15 seconds to collect cells that would either confirm or destroy a billionaire's desperate hope. Margaret sealed the swab in a tube, labeled it with a barcode, and entered information into a tablet. "This will go directly to Genetech Labs," Margaret explained. "Chain of custody will be maintained throughout. Results typically take 48 to 72 hours. Lily signed the consent forms with shaking hands. Her signature looked like a stranger's handwriting. When it was done, Daniel handed her a tablet showing a bank transfer confirmation. $250,000 had been deposited into an escrow account bearing both her name and Grace's. The money was real. This was happening. As Lily left the clinic, she felt hollowed out. She had just sold a piece of her genetic identity to a man she did not know. The money would save Grace's life, and for that she was grateful. But the cost felt higher than dollars could measure. Across town, the sample arrived at Genentech Labs in a secured courier bag. The facility occupied 3 floors of a medical complex in Midtown. It was a temple to science, all white walls and sophisticated equipment that could decode the mysteries locked in human cells. Dr. Thomas Whitmore, the lab's director, personally logged the sample into the system. Whitmore was 47 years old with graying hair and the permanent exhaustion of a man who slept poorly. He had built his reputation on accuracy and discretion, 2 qualities that made Genentech the preferred lab for New York's elite. Celebrities used his services for paternity tests. Law firms relied on his testimony in court cases. He had testified before Congress twice on genetic privacy issues. He was also a man with secrets that were about to cost him his soul. The sample from Lily Carter sat on his desk in its sealed tube. Beside it was the genetic profile of Jonathan Blackwood, pulled from the Executive Health Program database. Whitmore stared at both for a long moment before his phone buzzed with a text message. The message was from a number he recognized, a number he wished he could forget. The text contained no words, just a wire transfer confirmation. $100,000 had been deposited into an offshore account under Whitmore's name. Blood money, silence money, the price of his integrity. Whitmore closed his eyes and thought about how he had arrived at this moment. The gambling had started small, a few hundred on football games, a weekend trip to Atlantic City. It was harmless fun, he had told himself, a way to unwind from the stress of running a genetics lab. But harmless fun became compulsion. Compulsion became debt. Within 2 years, he owed $180,000 to people who did not accept payment plans. Victor Blackwood had appeared like a savior. Jonathan's uncle had somehow learned about the debt and made it disappear with a single wire transfer. Whitmore had been so grateful he had not asked questions, had not wondered why a senior executive at Blackwood Global would pay off a stranger's gambling debts. He knew now. Victor had been buying leverage, buying insurance, against the day when he might need a genetic test to say exactly what he wanted it to say. That day had come. Whitmore ran the DNA analysis with hands that trembled. He extracted genetic material from Lily's cheek cells and ran it through the lab's most sophisticated sequencing equipment. The computer analyzed 15 genetic markers, comparing them against Jonathan Blackwood's profile. The algorithms were merciless in their precision. DNA did not care about hope or grief or desperate prayers. It simply was. The results appeared on Whitmore's screen after 6 hours of processing. He read them once, read them again, read them a third time hoping the words would change. They did not change. Probability of sibling relationship, 99.97%. The genetic markers did not lie. Lily Carter and Jonathan Blackwood shared the same parents. They were brother and sister. After 20 years, Emma Blackwood had been found. Whitmore sat in his office until midnight, staring at those results. He thought about Jonathan Blackwood, who had spent 2 decades searching for his lost sister. Thought about Lily Carter, who deserved to know where she came from. Thought about the $100,000 in his offshore account and the threats Victor had made if the results came back positive. He thought about his daughter, who was starting college next year. Thought about his ex-wife, who would take everything if his gambling addiction became public. Thought about his career, his reputation, his entire life built on the foundation of scientific integrity. Then he opened a new file and began to type. The falsified report took 3 hours to create. Whitmore manually entered fabricated genetic markers that showed zero correlation between the samples. He invented data points that looked plausible to anyone who was not a geneticist. He triple-checked every number to ensure the deception would hold up to casual scrutiny. Then he generated an official conclusion that would shatter a grieving man's last hope. Probability of sibling relationship showed 0.00%. Subjects are genetically unrelated. Whitmore encrypted the false report and uploaded it to the secure server. Then he did something that ensured the truth could never surface. He deleted the raw data from Lily Carter's sample, purged it from the backup servers, removed every trace that the real test had ever been run. He took the physical sample from storage and placed it in the biological waste incinerator. Within seconds, the cells that could have proven Lily's identity were reduced to ash. When it was done, Whitmore sat in his empty office and wept. He had become the thing he despised most, a scientist who corrupted data, a professional who put money over truth. He had buried a miracle to save himself. He sent the encrypted report to Daniel Cross's secure email, and then poured himself 3 fingers of scotch from the bottle he kept in his desk. The liquor burned going down, but did nothing to wash away the taste of what he had done. Across the city, Jonathan Blackwood was living through the longest 48 hours of his life. He had cleared his schedule completely, something his assistant had never seen him do. Board meetings were postponed. Conference calls were delegated. The $8.7 billion Nakamura deal sat in limbo, while John paced the 5,200 square feet of his penthouse like a caged animal. He could not eat, could not sleep, could not focus on anything except the question that had consumed him for 20 years. Is she alive? Is Emma alive? The penthouse had never felt more like a prison. Every surface was cold marble and glass. Every piece of furniture was selected by an interior designer who prized aesthetic over comfort. There were no photos on the walls except the one of his family. No personal touches. No evidence that anyone actually lived in this space. It was a mausoleum for a man who had forgotten how to live. John stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows and watched the city move below him. Somewhere out there, Lily Carter was going about her day, unaware that her DNA was being analyzed in a lab, unaware that the results would either reunite a family or confirm that hope was a poison that slowly destroyed you from the inside. He tried to work, opened his laptop, reviewed quarterly reports, read analyst predictions about market trends, but the numbers meant nothing. His mind could not focus on anything except the question that had consumed him for 20 years. Is she alive? Is Emma alive? The first 12 hours were the hardest. John paced the length of his penthouse exactly 47 times. He knew because he counted each circuit, needing something concrete to hold on to. The space was 5,200 square feet arranged in an open plan. 5,200 square feet that felt like a cage. He stood in the kitchen at 2 in the morning and realized he could not remember the last meal he had eaten. His assistant had sent food. It sat untouched on the counter, expensive takeout from restaurants that charged $50 for a salad. The waste would have horrified his mother. Catherine Blackwood had been raised during leaner times and never forgot the value of not wasting food. She had made that value part of how she raised her children. That memory triggered others. John found himself thinking about family dinners, not the formal affairs when they entertained business associates, but the quiet Tuesday nights when it was just the 4 of them. His mother would cook something simple, spaghetti or roast chicken. His father would tell terrible jokes. Emma would get sauce all over her face and laugh when John teased her about it. Those dinners felt like another life. A life that ended on a rainy October night when headlights came from nowhere and destroyed everything that mattered. By hour 24, John had not slept at all. He tried lying down, but his mind would not quiet. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily Carter's wrist, saw the crescent moon birthmark, saw Emma's face superimposed over this stranger's features. The resemblance was not obvious. Lily had brown hair where Emma had been blonde, different shaped face, different build, but something in the eyes, something in the way she moved. It called to a memory he could not quite place. He got up and went to his study. In the bottom drawer of his desk, locked away, was a box he had not opened in 5 years. Inside were Emma's things, the few items recovered from the crash site or saved from her bedroom before his uncle sold the family home. Her teddy bear, worn and faded, a pink blanket she carried everywhere, a plastic bracelet from a trip to the zoo, baby shoes his mother had bronzed, and photographs, so many photographs. John spread them out on his desk. Emma at 6 months, sitting up for the first time. Emma at 1 year, cake smeared across her face. Emma at 2 years, running through a sprinkler in the backyard. Emma at 3 years, dressed as a princess for Halloween. Emma at 4 years, starting preschool with a backpack bigger than she was. Emma at 5 years, 3 days before the crash, holding his hand and smiling at the camera. In every photograph, the birthmark was visible. The crescent moon on her left wrist, sometimes clear and defined, sometimes just a shadow depending on the light. John had memorized that mark, had looked at it so many times he could draw it from memory with his eyes closed. And Lily Carter's mark had been identical, not similar, not close enough, identical. By hour 36, John was bargaining with a god he was not sure he believed in. He stood at the windows and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and spoke to the empty air. If she's Emma, I'll be a better brother this time. I'll make up for 20 years. I'll give her everything she should have had. Just let it be her. Please let it be her. But faith had never been John's strength. He believed in numbers, in data, in evidence. And in 6 hours, the evidence would either save him or destroy him. The memories came in waves. John had learned to suppress them over the years, to lock them away in a mental vault that only opened in nightmares. But now, with the DNA test pending, the vault had cracked open, and the memories spilled out unchecked. He remembered Emma's birth. He had been 9 years old enough to understand that his parents were bringing home a baby sister, but too young to grasp what that meant. His father had let him hold Emma in the hospital, supporting her tiny head with his hand. She had weighed 7 pounds and 3 ounces. She had his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin. And on her left wrist, barely visible against her newborn skin, was a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. His mother had kissed that mark and said it made Emma special. His father had said it was good luck, a sign she would always find her way home. John had traced it with his finger and made a solemn vow that he would always protect his baby sister. He remembered teaching Emma to walk. She had been 11 months old, pulling herself up on furniture and taking tentative steps before falling on her padded bottom. John would hold her hands and walk backwards, encouraging her to follow. When she finally took 3 steps on her own, he had cheered so loudly their mother came running to see what was wrong. He remembered her first birthday party. Emma smashing a moon-shaped cake with her tiny fists, laughing as frosting covered her face. His mother singing happy birthday in her soft voice. His father taking endless photos. The cake had been vanilla with buttercream frosting. Emma had worn a yellow dress with white flowers. She had opened exactly 3 presents before losing interest and playing with the wrapping paper instead. He remembered the last time he saw her alive. It was 3 days after that photo on his desk was taken. They were leaving for his grandparents' house in Connecticut. Emma had been in her car seat, clutching her teddy bear and singing a nonsense song only she understood. John had been annoyed because his father refused to let him stay home alone. He had spent the car ride sulking in the front seat, too wrapped up in teenage angst to appreciate that he had everything that mattered. Then came the crash, the headlights, the screaming metal, the world turning upside down. And when it stopped, his parents were dead and Emma was gone. The police investigation had been massive. Every law enforcement agency in Connecticut and New York had been mobilized. The FBI had been brought in. His uncle Victor, newly appointed as John's guardian, had spent millions on private investigators. They had chased hundreds of leads, supposed sightings in distant states, anonymous tips that led nowhere, women who claimed to have witnessed the crash. Each lead had been investigated thoroughly, and each one had ended in disappointment. The prevailing theory was that someone had pulled Emma from the wreckage before first responders arrived. Perhaps a good Samaritan who panicked when they realized the parents were dead. Perhaps someone with darker intentions who saw an opportunity. Emma's car seat had been torn from its mounting. The door had been ripped off its hinges. It was possible that she had been thrown from the vehicle during the crash. But search teams had combed the area for miles and found nothing. For years, John had held on to hope. Every blonde girl he saw on the street made his heart stop. Every missing child report made him check for the birthmark. He had funded a private database that tracked foundling children across the country. He had hired investigators to follow up on every possible lead. He had never stopped searching. But as the years passed, hope became harder to maintain. Emma's 5th birthday came and went, then her 10th, her 15th. The case went cold. The investigators filed their final reports. His uncle Victor had sat him down and said the words John had refused to accept. "She's gone, Jonathan. You have to let her rest." John had never let her rest. He had built Blackwood Global partly to honor his parents' legacy, but mostly to have the resources to keep searching. Every acquisition, every billion added to his fortune, every expansion into new markets was in service of one goal: find Emma, bring her home. And now maybe, after 20 years he had. The notification came at exactly 48 hours. John's phone chimed with an email from Daniel Cross. The subject line read, DNA results. John stared at the notification for a full minute before he could make himself open it. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the phone. He sat down on the cold marble floor of his living room and tapped the email open. Daniel's message was brief. John, the results are attached. I'm so sorry. Sorry. That single word told John everything before he even opened the PDF. Daniel would not be sorry if the results were positive. Would not be sorry if Emma had been found. The word sorry meant John's worst fear was about to be confirmed. He opened the attachment with fingers that felt numb. The report was dense with genetic terminology and technical data. John skipped past all of it and went straight to the conclusion. Probability of sibling relationship between subject A and subject B, 0.00%. Analysis of 15 genetic markers shows no shared maternal or paternal DNA. Subjects are genetically unrelated. The phone slipped from John's hands and clattered on the marble floor. The screen cracked, but he did not notice. He did not notice anything except the void opening up inside his chest where Hope had lived for 48 hours. She was not Emma. Lily Carter was not his sister. The birthmark was a coincidence, a cosmic joke, a reminder that the universe did not care about his grief or his desperate need to find the only family he had left. John sat on the floor of his penthouse and felt something inside him break. Not dramatically, not with tears or screaming, just a quiet fracturing, like ice forming over water. The part of him that could still hope, that could still believe in miracles, died in that moment. All that remained was the certainty that Emma was truly gone, and he was truly alone. He called Daniel after an hour of sitting in silence. His voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of a man who had shut down everything that could feel pain. Finalize the payment to Ms. Carter, John said. Add $50,000 for the emotional distress. Draft a non-disclosure agreement. She is never to contact me or anyone at Blackwood Global again. Daniel tried to say something, but John cut him off. And Daniel, delete her file. I don't want to see her name again. He ended the call and stood up slowly. The man who had broken down on the floor was gone, replaced by the Ice King the tabloids wrote about. Jonathan Blackwood, billionaire CEO, untouchable and unreachable. He had work to do, deals to close, an empire to run. The $8.7 billion Nakamura acquisition needed his attention. The board was pressuring him to consider strategic partnerships in emerging markets. Life went on. It always did. For Lily, the news came 3 days after the sample collection. She was at the hospital with Grace when Daniel Cross called. Her mother was hooked up to the dialysis machine, the mechanical rhythm of the treatment creating a steady background pulse. Grace was dozing, her face peaceful despite the tubes running from her arm. Lily stepped into the hallway to take the call. Ms. Carter, Daniel said, and his tone told her everything before he spoke another word. The results are in. I'm sending them to your email now. She could hear something in his voice. Sympathy, maybe. Or disappointment. Her heart was suddenly loud in her ears. Just tell me, she said. Am I his sister? The pause lasted forever. No, Daniel said quietly. The DNA test shows no genetic relationship. I'm sorry, Lily. She thanked him and ended the call before he could say anything else. For a moment, she just stood in the hospital hallway, phone in hand, processing the information. She was not Emma Blackwood, not the lost sister, not the miracle reunion. Just Lily Carter, orphan, nobody, the same person she had been before a billionaire dropped a glass and whispered a dead girl's name. The relief hit her first. She would not have to navigate the complicated world of being related to Jonathan Blackwood, would not have to figure out how to be someone's sister after 25 years of being alone, would not have to split her identity between the girl Grace raised and the girl the Blackwoods lost. Her life could go back to normal. But underneath the relief was something else, a hollow disappointment she had not expected. For 3 days, she had allowed herself to imagine having a brother, having a history, having DNA that connected her to someone. For 3 days, the question of where she came from had seemed answerable. Now she was back to mystery and emptiness. She had not realized how much hope she had been carrying until it was taken away. The logical part of her brain knew it was unlikely. The timing did not match. The geography did not match. Emma Blackwood disappeared in Connecticut, and Lily Carter appeared in Brooklyn. Different places, different circumstances. It made no sense that they could be the same person. But the birthmark, that impossible identical birthmark. How could two people have the exact same mark in the exact same place? What were the statistical odds? She wished she had asked the nurse, wished she had demanded to see the raw data. But she was not a scientist. She was just a waitress who happened to have a crescent moon on her wrist. Lily walked back to Grace's hospital room slowly. Her mother was awake now, the dialysis treatment nearly complete. Grace looked at her daughter's face and knew immediately that something had shifted. It was negative, Lily said before Grace could ask. I'm not related to him. Grace took her hand and squeezed gently. Then you're still mine, she said with a small smile. All mine. That should have been enough. Grace's love should have been enough to fill the empty space inside her. But Lily felt something she had never felt before. A longing not just to know where she came from, but to belong to something bigger than the small circle of people who had chosen to love her. The following weeks blurred together. Lily signed the non-disclosure agreement without reading it thoroughly, deposited the check, called the hospital to schedule Grace's transplant. The money changed everything. Doors that had been closed suddenly opened. Doctors who had been evasive suddenly became optimistic. A kidney became available within 2 weeks. The day of Grace's surgery was the longest of Lily's life. 8 hours of waiting while strangers cut open her mother and gave her a second chance at life. Lily sat in the surgical waiting room and thought about how she had gotten here. A man had seen her birthmark and made a mistake. That mistake had resulted in $300,000. That money was saving Grace's life. Maybe there was no such thing as coincidence. Maybe the universe had orchestrated this entire bizarre sequence of events to give Grace more time. If that was true, Lily could accept being wrong about her identity, could accept never knowing where she came from. Grace's life was worth more than answers. The surgery was successful. Grace woke up in recovery with color in her cheeks that Lily had not seen in 3 years. The new kidney was functioning perfectly. The doctors were amazed at how quickly her numbers improved. Within a week, Grace was walking the hospital hallways. Within 2 weeks, she was home. They moved into a better apartment in Astoria. 2 bedrooms so Grace could have her own space. A balcony where she could sit in the sun. Actual closets. Central heating. It was modest by Manhattan standards, but it felt like a palace compared to their old place. Lily enrolled in the graphic design program she had been putting off for years. With Grace's medical crisis managed and money in the bank, she could finally focus on building a future instead of just surviving. She attended classes online, learning software and theory. She was good at it. Her professors praised her natural eye for composition and color. She should have been happy. Should have felt nothing but gratitude for how dramatically her life had improved. But late at night, when Grace was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Lily would sit on the balcony and stare at the crescent moon in the sky. She would roll up her sleeve and compare her birthmark to the moon overhead and wonder why they looked so similar. She thought about Jonathan Blackwood more than she wanted to admit, about the devastation in his gray eyes when he saw her wrist, about how certain he had been. Men like that did not break easily. It took something powerful to shatter the composure of a billionaire CEO. He had not been faking that reaction. He had truly believed she was his sister. What had he seen that the DNA test said was not there? She returned to Grace's room and sat in the chair beside the dialysis machine. Her mother woke slowly and looked at her with eyes that saw too much. It was negative, Lily said before Grace could ask. I'm not related to him. Grace took her hand and squeezed gently. Then you're still mine, she said with a small smile. All mine. The legal documents arrived 2 days later. The final payment confirmation showed $300,000. $250 as agreed, plus $50,000 additional. The cover letter from Daniel Cross was brief and professional. While the results were not what we hoped, please accept this with Mr. Blackwood's gratitude. There was also a non-disclosure agreement, dense legal language that essentially meant Lily could never speak about the DNA test. the birthmark incident, or anything related to Jonathan Blackwood. Violation would result in return of all funds plus legal penalties. It felt like hush money, like he was paying her to disappear from his life completely. Lily signed the agreement because she needed the money, and because she had no desire to be part of his world anyway. She deposited the check and immediately called the hospital to schedule Grace's transplant surgery. The financial coordinator, who had been telling her for months that they needed payment up front, suddenly became warm and accommodating. Money changed everything. Grace's transplant was scheduled for 3 weeks later. A kidney from a deceased donor, a good match, excellent prognosis. The surgery went perfectly. 8 hours under anesthesia, while skilled surgeons gave Grace a second chance at life. Lily sat in the waiting room and watched the sun set over the city and thought about the strange chain of events that had led to this moment. A man had seen her birthmark, had thought she was his lost sister, had been wrong, but his mistake had saved Grace's life. There was something almost poetic about it, something that made Lily wonder if maybe the universe had a plan even when nothing made sense. 2 months passed. Grace recovered beautifully, her color returning, her energy rebuilding. They moved into a larger apartment with the remaining money, a 2-bedroom place in Astoria with actual sunlight and a small balcony. Lily enrolled full-time in a graphic design program she had been putting off for years. For the first time in her adult life, she was not working 3 jobs just to survive. She should have been happy, should have felt grateful and relieved and content. But something restless lived inside her now, something the negative DNA test had awakened rather than settled. She found herself thinking about Jonathan Blackwood at odd moments, about the devastation in his eyes when he saw her birthmark, about the name Emma spoken like a prayer, about how certain he had been. How could someone be that wrong? How could a birthmark, a random arrangement of cells, look so much like something meaningful that it shattered a billionaire's composure? Late at night, when Grace was asleep and the city was quiet, Lily would roll up her sleeve and stare at the crescent moon on her wrist. She had carried this mark her entire life without thinking much about it. Now it felt like a question without an answer. A map to nowhere. Across town, in a penthouse that felt more like a tomb than a home, Jonathan Blackwood was also awake late at night. He had thrown himself back into work with ruthless intensity. The Nakamura deal was finalized, 3 more companies acquired. Blackwood Global's stock price reached all-time highs. The board was discussing a possible IPO. John was on the cover of Forbes with the headline, "The Untouchable." But alone in his penthouse, staring at the photo of his family, John felt more touchable than he had in years. The hope that had sustained him for 2 decades was gone. Emma was not coming back. She was gone, truly gone, and he would spend the rest of his life not knowing what happened to her. Daniel visited twice in those 2 months. Both times he found John in the same position, standing at the windows, looking down at the city with empty eyes. Daniel had served with special forces in 3 war zones. He had seen men break under pressure, seen them lose themselves to grief and trauma. He recognized the signs in his friend and boss. "You need to talk to someone," Daniel said on the second visit. "A therapist, someone who can help you process this." "There's nothing to process," John replied without turning from the window. "She's dead. I buried her tonight. Now I can finally move on." But they both knew he was lying. In his office at Blackwood Global, Victor Blackwood poured himself a celebratory scotch and raised it to the portrait of his older brother that hung on the wall. "To you, Michael," he said. "Your little girl stays buried." The DNA test had come back negative. The threat was neutralized. Emma's trust fund would remain under his management for another 5 years, at which point she would be declared legally dead, and the assets would revert to Jonathan's estate. By then, Victor would have covered his tracks completely. The $36 million he had embezzled over the years would be hidden behind shell corporations and offshore accounts that even the best forensic accountants could not untangle. He had won. He was safe. The empire his brother built would never know how thoroughly he had betrayed it. But Victor's celebration was premature, because in a small organized office on the 78th floor of Blackwood Global's headquarters, Daniel Cross was beginning to ask questions that would unravel everything. Daniel had built his career on being thorough. In special forces, thoroughness kept you alive. In corporate security, it kept your clients safe. And Daniel's instincts, honed by years of high-stakes operations, were telling him something was wrong with the DNA test results. It started with a simple observation. Victor Blackwood had been too supportive after the negative results came back, too eager to tell John it was for the best, that he needed to move on, that chasing ghosts was destroying him. Victor had never been that supportive of anything John did. The man carried resentment like other people carried briefcases. Daniel had seen enough of Victor over the years to recognize the pattern. The older man smiled in board meetings and played the loyal uncle in public. But in private moments, when he thought no one was watching, his face carried the bitterness of a man who believed he had been cheated. Victor had spent his entire life in his older brother's shadow. When Michael died, that shadow transferred to Michael's son. Victor managed to hide his resentment most of the time, but it was there, simmering beneath the surface. So why was he so supportive now? Why was he almost cheerful about the negative DNA test? A normal response would have been sympathy, shared disappointment. Instead, Victor had shown up at John's penthouse with expensive scotch and reassurances that this was all for the best. That was the first red flag. Daniel began running background checks, first on Genentech Labs. The facility had a spotless reputation. Dr. Thomas Whitmore was considered one of the top geneticists in the country, published in peer-reviewed journals, testified as an expert witness in major court cases. No complaints, no malpractice suits, no red flags in his professional history. Then Daniel went deeper. He had access to databases that were not strictly legal, but were extremely useful. Financial records, credit reports, bank statements. The kind of information that revealed what people did when they thought no one was watching. What he found was interesting. Dr. Whitmore had significant gambling debts 3 years ago. Not small recreational losses. Serious debt. $180,000 owed to various casinos and private lenders. The kind of debt that ruined careers and sometimes ended in violence. The kind of debt that made a man vulnerable to pressure. Daniel knew about gambling addiction. He had seen it destroy soldiers, good men who came home from war zones and tried to fill the emptiness with a rush of risk. It never ended well. The house always won. And when you owed money to the kind of people who loaned to desperate gamblers, you either paid or you suffered. But Whitmore's debts had not destroyed him. They had simply disappeared, paid off in full by a wire transfer from an offshore shell corporation. The payment happened 3 years ago, right before Whitmore's divorce was finalized. Convenient timing. Almost like someone had given him a lifeline precisely when he needed it most. Daniel traced the money through 3 layers of holding companies. Each layer was designed to obscure the original source. The shell corporations were registered in different countries: the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore. Following the money trail required patience and access to international financial databases. Daniel had both. He also had a friend who worked in financial crimes at the FBI. A favor was called in. A database was accessed that should not have been accessed. The ultimate source of the wire transfer that paid off Whitmore's gambling debt led back to a holding company registered to Victor Blackwood. Daniel sat in his office at 3 in the morning, staring at the web of financial connections he had mapped out on his computer screen. Lines connecting names and corporations and dates. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Victor had leverage over the lab director. Victor had motive to want Emma to stay dead, and the DNA test results had come back suspiciously fast. He pulled up the timeline. Sample collected Monday morning, results delivered Wednesday morning. Exactly 48 hours. Standard sibling DNA tests took 5 to 7 days for thorough analysis. 48 hours was barely enough time to run the sequencing, let alone verify the results. It was almost like someone had known what answer they needed to provide and had not bothered with a real analysis. Daniel opened a new file and began documenting everything: financial records, timeline, Whitmore's gambling history, Victor's shell corporations. It was all circumstantial, nothing that would hold up in court, but it was enough to raise serious questions. The problem was John. Daniel had worked for Jonathan Blackwood for 6 years. In that time, he had seen his boss handle corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, and market crashes with ice-cold composure. But he had never seen John as broken as he had been after those DNA results came back. The hope had been devastating enough. The loss had nearly destroyed him. Going to John now with nothing but suspicions and circumstantial evidence would be cruel. If Daniel was wrong, he would be reopening a wound that had barely started to scab over. If he was right, the implications were even worse. It would mean John's uncle had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible, had lied about his sister being dead to protect embezzled money. Daniel knew what it meant to be separated from a sister. He had spent 15 years in that particular hell. 15 years of wondering if Sophia was alive, if she remembered him, if she blamed him for not finding her sooner. When John had helped reunite them, Daniel had sworn he would do anything for the man. Anything. Finding out if Emma was really dead qualified as anything. He made a decision. He would keep investigating, quietly, without telling John. He would find proof, one way or another. If the DNA test was legitimate, he would bury his suspicions and never mention them. But if it was falsified, if Lily Carter really was Emma Blackwood, then he would bring John his sister no matter what it cost. Daniel pulled up Lily's file again, the one he had been told to delete. He had kept a backup copy against orders, because thoroughness meant never assuming you had all the information. He studied her photograph, 25 years old, brown hair, green eyes, a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. Emma Blackwood had been 5 years old when she disappeared, 20 years ago. That would make her 25 now. The math worked. The birthmark matched. The only thing that did not match was the DNA test. And DNA tests did not lie, unless someone made them lie. Daniel closed the file and began planning his next steps. He needed to find the nurse who had collected the sample, needed to verify the chain of custody, needed to find any crack in the process that could prove tampering. It would take time and resources and absolute discretion. But if he was right, it would give John back the only family he had left. And that was worth any risk. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, Lily was helping Grace unpack boxes in their new apartment. The transplant had been successful beyond all expectations. Grace had energy she had not felt in years, color in her cheeks, laughter that came easily. It was like having her mother back from the edge of death. They were clearing out a storage closet when Lily found a box she had not opened in over a decade. It was labeled St. Margaret's in faded marker. Inside were the few belongings she had arrived with as a toddler. A threadbare yellow blanket, tiny shoes that would fit a 2-year-old, a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, and at the bottom, wrapped carefully in faded flannel, something hard and metallic. Lily unwrapped it slowly. A silver locket emerged, tarnished with age but still beautiful. It was oval-shaped with delicate floral engraving on the front. The clasp was stiff, but she managed to pry it open. Inside were 2 tiny photographs behind clouded plastic. On the left was a young boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, with dark hair and serious eyes. On the right was a baby with blonde curls, holding a stuffed teddy bear. The baby's hand was visible in the photo, and even through the clouded plastic, even after all these years, Lily could see a small dark mark on the inner wrist. Her breath caught, the boy's eyes. She had seen those eyes before. They were the same stormy gray that had stared at her wrist in a restaurant 2 months ago. The same eyes that belonged to Jonathan Blackwood. And the baby's birthmark, it looked exactly like hers. Grace came to stand beside her and looked at the locket. "What is that, honey?" she asked. Lily could barely speak. "I don't know," she whispered. "It was in my things from the orphanage. I've never seen it before." She stared at the photographs, at the boy who looked like the man who thought she was his sister, at the baby who had her birthmark, at the impossible possibility that maybe the DNA test had been wrong. "Mom," she said quietly, her voice shaking, "what if the DNA test was wrong? What if I really am Emma Blackwood?" The locket trembled in her hands, a piece of physical evidence that contradicted the scientific certainty of a negative DNA test. Somewhere in the city, a billionaire was trying to bury his grief. Somewhere else, a corrupt doctor was living with the weight of his lies. And in an investigator's office, a man was piecing together a conspiracy that would bring the truth back into the light. The past was not buried. It was simply waiting for the right moment to claw its way back to the surface. And that moment had just arrived. The locket sat on Lily's kitchen table for 3 days before she touched it again. It rested on a square of black velvet like an artifact from an archaeological dig, which in a sense it was, an artifact from a life she could not remember, a life the DNA test said had never been hers. But the photographs did not lie, or at least they told a different story than the genetic analysis. The boy in the left frame had Jonathan Blackwood's eyes, the exact shade of gray, the same intensity even in a child's face. And the baby in the right frame had a birthmark on her wrist that looked identical to the one Lily carried. She had studied the photos with a magnifying glass Grace used for embroidery work, had held them under different lights to see if the images would reveal something she had missed. The plastic covering the photographs was clouded with age, but the details were still visible. The boy wore a navy blue shirt. The baby held a teddy bear. And on that tiny wrist, clear enough to make Lily's heart race, was a crescent moon with a star. Grace found her daughter sitting at the table at 2 a.m, the locket open in front of her, a cold cup of coffee forgotten at her elbow. "You need to sleep, honey," Grace said gently. Lily looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Mom, what if I am Emma Blackwood? What if the DNA test was wrong?" Grace sat down heavily in the chair across from her. The transplant had been successful, but she still tired easily. Her new kidney was working beautifully, but her body was still adjusting to not being poisoned by its own waste. "DNA tests don't just get things wrong," Grace said carefully. "Those tests are accurate. The science is solid. But look at these photos." Lily pushed the locket across the table. "That boy has his eyes, exactly his eyes. And that baby has my birthmark, exactly my birthmark. What are the odds of that being a coincidence?" Grace studied the photographs for a long moment. When she looked up, her expression was troubled. "I don't know, baby. I truly don't know. But you signed a non-disclosure agreement. You took his money. If you go digging into this and you are wrong, you could lose everything. And if I am right, if I really am his sister and someone lied about the DNA test, then I have a brother who thinks I am dead. A brother who has been looking for me for 20 years. Don't I owe it to him to find out the truth?" Grace reached across the table and took Lily's hand. "What I think is that you need to be very careful. Men with billions of dollars have power you can't imagine. They have lawyers and security and ways of making problems disappear. If someone falsified that DNA test, they did it for a reason. And they won't be happy about you digging up the truth. So I should just let it go? Pretend I never found this locket? Live with the question mark for the rest of my life?" "I am saying, you need to think about what you are willing to risk," Grace said. "You have a good life now. School, stability, a future. If you go after this and it blows up in your face, you could lose all of that." But Lily was already shaking her head. "Mom, you taught me that some things are worth fighting for. You fought for 2 years to adopt me when everyone said a single woman could not provide properly for a child. You worked double shifts and sold your wedding ring and refused to give up. If this locket means what I think it means, then I have to fight too." Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she squeezed Lily's hand and said the words Lily needed to hear. "Okay, but you don't fight alone. We do this together." The next morning, Lily made 2 phone calls. The first was to a photography restoration service she found online. She needed the locket photographs cleaned and enlarged, needed to see every detail with absolute clarity. The technician said it would take a week and cost $300. Lily paid without hesitation. The second call was harder. She dialed the number for Genentech Labs and asked to speak with Dr. Thomas Whitmore. The receptionist asked what the call was regarding. Lily said it was about a DNA test conducted 2 months ago. She needed to discuss the results. After a long pause, the receptionist said Dr. Whitmore was not available. Would she like to leave a message? Lily left her name and number. She did not expect a call back, but she wanted to see if Whitmore's office would respond. Wanted to see if the mention of questioning DNA results would trigger any reaction. She was learning to think like an investigator. It was not a skill she had known she possessed. Across town, in an office that overlooked Central Park from 80 floors up, Daniel Cross was conducting his own investigation with the systematic precision of a military operation. He had spent 6 weeks following the money trail between Victor Blackwood and Dr. Thomas Whitmore. 6 weeks of late nights and careful database searches and calls to contacts who owed him favors. What he had assembled was damning. Victor had paid off Whitmore's gambling debts 3 years ago. That much was certain. The wire transfer trail was complicated, but Daniel had traced it through enough shell corporations to prove the connection. But proof of a financial relationship was not proof of DNA test falsification. Daniel needed more. He needed evidence that Whitmore had actually altered the results, needed documentation or testimony or some concrete link between the payment and the test. Without that, everything he had was circumstantial, suggestive, but not conclusive. He had tried to approach the nurse who collected Lily's sample. Margaret was her name. She worked at the private clinic part-time and seemed like the weak link in the chain. But when Daniel showed up at the clinic asking questions, he was told Margaret no longer worked there. She had resigned suddenly 2 weeks after collecting Lily's sample. No forwarding contact information, no explanation. Oh, that was suspicious. People did not just quit good jobs without reason. Either Margaret had been paid to disappear, or she had been scared into silence. Daniel suspected the latter. Victor Blackwood was many things, but subtle was not one of them. If he wanted someone silenced, he would make sure they understood the consequences of talking. Daniel had hit a wall. Without Margaret's testimony, without access to the actual lab records, without some kind of smoking gun, he could not prove the DNA test had been falsified. He had suspicions and financial connections, and a timeline that did not quite add up. But none of it was enough to take to John. He sat in his office reviewing his notes for the 100th time, looking for the angle he had missed. His computer screen showed a web of names and dates and money transfers. Victor at the center. Whitmore connected by financial ties. The DNA test sitting in the middle like a black box he could not open. His phone rang. Internal line, John's assistant. Mr. Cross, Mr. Blackwood would like to see you in his office. Daniel closed his files and headed up 2 floors to the executive suite. John's office occupied the entire southeast corner of the building with windows on 2 sides. It was furnished with the same cold minimalism as his penthouse. Black leather, chrome, glass, everything designed to intimidate. John was standing in the windows when Daniel entered. His boss did not turn around, just kept staring out at the city like he was searching for something in the concrete and steel. The man looked worse than Daniel had ever seen him. 2 months since the negative DNA results, and John had lost weight he could not afford to lose. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame. His hair needed cutting. There were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Daniel had watched men break in combat, had seen soldiers lose themselves to trauma and grief. The John Blackwood standing at these windows was breaking in slow motion. The Ice King was melting from the inside out, and no one could stop it. "I got a call from the legal department," John said. His voice was flat, empty. Apparently someone named Lily Carter tried to contact Genentech Labs yesterday, asked to speak with Dr. Whitmore about DNA test results. Daniel's stomach dropped. He had not expected Lily to make a move, had not thought she would risk violating the NDA, but apparently she had found something. Something that made her willing to risk $300,000 and legal action. "What did she want?" Daniel asked carefully. The receptionist did not give her the call. She left a message, and Whitmore called our legal team immediately. Apparently, the NDA includes a provision that any attempt to contact the lab or discuss the results constitutes a violation. John finally turned around. His face was haggard. He had not been sleeping well. Daniel could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the gray tint to his skin. 2 months had passed since the negative DNA results, and John had not recovered. If anything, he looked worse. "Our lawyers want to know if we should pursue legal action," John said. "They could force her to return the money plus penalties. They could bury her in litigation." "Is that what you want?" Daniel asked. John was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I don't want to destroy her life. I just want her to leave me alone. Tell legal to send a cease and desist letter. Make it clear that any further contact will result in legal consequences. But don't file suit. Not unless she pushes." Daniel nodded. He would contact legal. But more importantly, he needed to figure out why Lily was suddenly asking questions. What had she found? What had changed in the past 2 months that made her willing to risk everything? He had a feeling he was about to find out. The cease and desist letter arrived at Lily's apartment 3 days later. It was delivered by a courier who required a signature. The envelope was heavy, expensive paper, with the Blackwood Global logo embossed in silver. Inside were 4 pages of dense legal language that boiled down to a simple message: Stop asking questions or we will take everything. Lily read the letter twice. Her hands were shaking by the second reading. The language was clear. Any further attempt to contact Jonathan Blackwood or anyone associated with the DNA test would constitute a breach of the non-disclosure agreement. Such breach would require immediate return of all funds paid, plus penalties plus legal fees. The law firm representing Blackwood Global had offices in New York, Los Angeles, and London. They had won cases against Fortune 500 companies. They would crush her. Grace read the letter over Lily's shoulder. Baby, maybe this is a sign you should let it go. But Lily was thinking about the locket, about the photographs that showed a boy with Jonathan Blackwood's eyes and a baby with her birthmark, about the DNA test that said she was nobody, when every instinct in her body screamed that she was somebody. I can't let it go, Lily said. I need to know the truth. Even if the truth cost you everything? Lily looked at her mother, at the woman who had fought for her when no one else would, who had worked herself to exhaustion and sold her few valuables and refused to give up even when the system was designed to make her fail. You taught me that some truths are worth the cost, Lily said. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, but we do this smart. We don't make any more phone calls to labs or lawyers. We find another way. What other way? Grace smiled. Her daughter was good with computers and design, but Grace had spent 40 years in New York City, had worked in garment factories and restaurants and retail shops, had learned how to navigate systems and find information and connect with people who knew things. We find someone who can tell us if that DNA test was real or fake, Grace said. Someone who knows genetics and does not work for Blackwood Global. Someone who owes us nothing and has no reason to lie. The photography restoration service called a week later. The locket photographs were ready. Lily took the subway to their office in the Flatiron District and collected 2 manila envelopes. Inside were the original photographs plus high-resolution scans and physical prints enlarged to 8 by 10 inches. The enlarged photographs were stunning. Every detail that had been obscured by age and clouded plastic was now visible. The boy was around 9 or 10 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead. He wore a navy blue polo shirt and sat in what looked like a backyard. His expression was serious, almost protective, and his eyes were the exact shade of storm gray that Lily had seen in Jonathan Blackwood's face. The baby photograph was even more revealing. The child was around 1 year old with blonde curls and a gap-toothed smile. She wore a yellow dress with white flowers. She held a brown teddy bear that looked well-loved, and on her left wrist, clear and unmistakable in the enlarged image, was a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon with a single dot inside the curve. Lily laid the photographs side by side on her kitchen table. She pulled up her sleeve and placed her wrist next to the baby's image. The birthmarks were identical, not similar, not close, identical in shape, size, and placement. She took a photograph with her phone, her wrist next to the baby's wrist, the 2 birthmarks perfectly aligned. This was evidence, physical, visual evidence that could not be explained away by statistics or probability. Grace looked at the image on Lily's phone and shook her head slowly. That's not a coincidence, she said. No, Lily agreed, it's not. They had found their other way. The next step was finding someone who could tell them if the DNA test results made sense given this photographic evidence. Someone who understood genetics and probability and could give them an honest assessment. Grace made phone calls. She contacted a friend who worked at Mount Sinai Hospital. That friend knew someone in the genetics department, that someone agreed to meet with them off the record, no names, no official consultation. Just a conversation about hypothetical DNA test results and photographic evidence of matching birthmarks. The geneticist was a woman in her 60s named Dr. Patricia Chen. She met them at a coffee shop in Chinatown, far from any place they might be recognized. She wore casual clothes and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked like someone's grandmother, not a leading expert in genetic inheritance. Lily showed her the photographs, explained the situation without using names, said a DNA test had shown 0 genetic relationship between 2 people who had identical birthmarks in identical locations, asked if that was possible. Dr. Chen studied the photographs for a long time. She pulled out a jeweler's loupe and examined the birthmarks with professional intensity. When she looked up, her expression was grave. These marks are not just similar, she said. They appear to be identical in morphology, placement, and pigmentation pattern. Birthmarks like this are relatively rare. The crescent shape with the interior dot is a specific configuration of melanocytes. The probability of two unrelated individuals having this exact mark in this exact location is astronomical. Lily's heart was pounding. So if a DNA test said two people with these marks were not related, would you question the results? I would question everything, Dr. Chen said. Either those test results were falsified, or you are not looking at the same person in both photographs, or there is an explanation that defies standard genetic science. But the simplest explanation, the one that Occam's razor would suggest, is that the DNA test was wrong. Can DNA tests be falsified? Grace asked. Dr. Chen's expression darkened. They can, it is not easy, and it requires someone with access to the lab systems, but it can be done. You would need to fabricate genetic markers and delete the real data. You would need someone who understands the science and is willing to corrupt it. How would we prove that happened? You would need access to the original samples or the raw data logs. Most reputable labs maintain backup records precisely to prevent this kind of fraud. But if someone had sufficient access and motivation, those records could be deleted. Dr. Chen handed the photographs back to Lily. I cannot tell you what to do, she said. But if this were my case, I would assume the DNA test was falsified. The photographic evidence is too compelling. Someone lied. The question is who and why. They thanked Dr. Chen and left the coffee shop. Lily felt like she was holding dynamite. She had expert opinions suggesting the DNA test was fake. She had photographic evidence that she might actually be Emma Blackwood. She had enough to justify confronting Jonathan Blackwood directly. But she also had a cease and desist letter threatening to destroy her if she made contact. She had an NDA that would cost her everything if she violated it. She had lawyers who would crush her without a second thought. Mom, what do I do? Lily asked as they walked through Chinatown's crowded streets. You find someone who has as much to lose as you do, Grace said. Someone who wants the truth as much as you do. Someone who can help you without getting buried by lawyers. You mean Daniel Cross? Grace nodded. He gave you his card. He told you to call if you ever needed anything. Maybe it is time to see if he meant it. Daniel's phone rang at 11 at night. He was in his office working through financial records again, looking for the connection he had missed. The number on his screen was not one he recognized. He almost let it go to voicemail. Then something made him answer. This is Cross. Mr. Cross, this is Lily Carter. I know I am not supposed to contact anyone. I got the cease and desist letter, but I need to talk to you. It is important. Daniel sat up straighter. Ms. Carter, I can't advise you to violate the NDA. I am not asking you to violate anything. I am asking you to look at evidence. Evidence that suggests the DNA test was falsified. Silence on the line. Daniel's mind was racing. She had found something that made her willing to risk legal action. What kind of evidence? He asked carefully. Photographs from when I was a baby. And expert opinion from a geneticist who says the DNA results don't make sense given the physical evidence. Mr. Cross, I think someone lied. I think I really am Emma Blackwood, and I think you suspect the same thing. More silence. Daniel was calculating risks and possibilities. If Lily was right, if the DNA test had been falsified, then everything he had been investigating was about to break wide open. But if she was wrong, if this was just a desperate orphan clinging to hope, then meeting with her would be a betrayal of John's trust. Can you send me the photographs? Daniel asked. I would rather show you in person. This is not something you can see properly on a phone screen. Daniel made a decision. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. There's a park near your apartment. Astoria Park by the waterfront. Meet me by the Hellgate Bridge view. Come alone. He ended the call and sat in his office for a long time, thinking about what he was about to do. He was John's head of security. His loyalty was supposed to be absolute, but his loyalty was to the man, not to lies that kept him from finding his sister. If Lily had real evidence, Daniel needed to see it. And if that evidence proved what he suspected, then he would finally have enough to go to John with the truth, even if that truth destroyed everything. The next day was cold and clear. Lily arrived at Astoria Park 15 minutes early and walked along the waterfront path until she could see the Hellgate Bridge spanning the East River. The massive steel structure was painted red and looked like something from another era. Industrial, powerful, built to last. Daniel appeared exactly at 2 p.m. He wore civilian clothes instead of a suit, jeans and a leather jacket, trying to blend in. He approached carefully, eyes scanning the area to make sure they were not being watched. "Show me," he said without preamble. Lily pulled out the manila envelope and handed it to him. Daniel opened it and studied the enlarged photographs for a long time. She watched his face as he looked at the boy's eyes, at the baby's birthmark, at the undeniable visual evidence that these people were connected. "This is you," Daniel said, pointing to the baby photograph. "And this is John when he was around 9 years old. I have seen photographs from that age. This is definitely him." "How can you be sure?" "Because I know his face. And because that birthmark is identical to yours." He looked up at Lily. "Where did you get these?" "They were in a locket, from my things at the orphanage. I found it a few weeks ago when we were moving. I did not even know it existed." Daniel studied the photographs again. Then he pulled out his phone and took pictures of them. Documenting the evidence, he handed the originals back to Lily. "I have been investigating for 2 months," he said. "I found financial connections between John's uncle Victor and the director of Genetech Labs. The man who ran your DNA test had gambling debts. Victor paid them off 3 years ago, right before you walked into that restaurant. So Victor knew I might show up one day." "No. I think Victor has been preparing for this possibility for 20 years. I think he has been embezzling from Emma's trust fund. If Emma comes back and claims that money, forensic accountants will discover what he has done. He had motive to make sure the DNA test came back negative." "Can you prove the test was falsified?" "Not yet. But between your photographs and my financial evidence, we have enough to justify a deeper investigation. We need to find the nurse who collected your sample. We need to access the lab's backup records. We need to build a case that can survive legal scrutiny." Lily felt hope and fear warring in her chest. "So you believe me? You think I am Emma Blackwood?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I think the evidence strongly suggests it. But I cannot go to John with possibilities and suspicions. He has been broken too many times. If I tell him you might be his sister and I am wrong, it will destroy what is left of him. I need proof. Absolute, undeniable proof." "How do we get that?" "We do what I have been trained to do. We investigate until we find the truth. And when we find it, we bury everyone who tried to hide it." They stood by the waterfront looking at the Hellgate Bridge as the winter wind came off the river. 2 people who had lost their families were about to go to war with a billionaire and his corrupt uncle. The odds were not in their favor, but neither of them had survived this long by playing it safe. Daniel looked at Lily and saw something he recognized. The same determination he had felt when he was searching for his sister. The same refusal to accept defeat. She was not just looking for answers anymore. She was on a mission. "What do we do first?" Lily asked. "First we find Margaret, the nurse who collected your sample. She disappeared after the test, but people always leave trails. I have a lead on where she might be hiding. If Victor threatened her, she is our weak link. Scared people make mistakes. And then we find a way to access Genetech Lab's backup servers. Every reputable facility maintains redundant data storage for exactly this reason. If Whitmore falsified your results, the real data still exists somewhere. We just have to find it. I know people who can help with that. People who owe me favors." "That sounds illegal." Daniel smiled grimly. "Ms. Carter, we are about to go after one of the most powerful families in New York. Legal stopped being relevant the moment they lied about who you are. The question is not whether we will break rules. The question is how far you are willing to go." Lily thought about Grace, about the woman who had broken rules to adopt her, who had worked off the books jobs when money was tight, who had taught her that sometimes doing the right thing meant ignoring the rules that protected the wrong people. "As far as it takes," Lily said. They parted ways with a plan. Daniel would track down Margaret and see what he could learn. Lily would stay quiet and wait for his signal. No more phone calls, no more questions. Just patience, while Daniel did what he did best. But as Lily walked back to her apartment, she felt something she had not felt in years. Purpose. Not just surviving day to day, not just working to pay bills. Real purpose. She was not just drifting through life anymore. She was fighting for something that mattered. Fighting to reclaim an identity that had been stolen from her. Fighting to give a man his sister back. Fighting for the truth. Grace was waiting when she got home. The older woman had been cooking, filling the apartment with the smell of garlic and onions. Comfort food. The kind of meal that said we are in this together. "Well?" Grace asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What did he say?" Lily pulled out her phone and showed Grace the photograph Daniel had taken. The locket pictures documenting the evidence. "He believes me," she said. "He thinks I am Emma Blackwood, and he is going to help me prove it." Grace looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she pulled Lily into a hug. "Baby, you know this is going to get dangerous. Men with money and power do not like being exposed. They fight back. They hurt people." "I know," Lily said into her mother's shoulder. "But if I do not do this, I will spend the rest of my life wondering. And I will know that Jonathan Blackwood spent the rest of his life looking for a sister who is alive but can never find him. I cannot live with that." "Then we do this together," Grace said, "the same way we have done everything, together." That night, Lily sat at her kitchen table with the locket open in front of her. She studied the photographs of the boy and the baby, tried to imagine what it must have been like to be 9 years old and lose your entire family in one terrible night. Tried to imagine spending 20 years searching for someone who might be dead. Tried to imagine the moment when hope finally died and you accepted that you would never find them. She thought about the DNA test that said she was nobody. The scientific certainty that should have been irrefutable. But science was performed by humans, and humans could be bought, threatened, corrupted. The question was not whether the test could be falsified. The question was who had the motive and means to do it. Victor Blackwood had both, $36 million worth of motive, and connections to a lab director who had been desperate enough to take a bribe. The pieces fit. The evidence pointed in one direction, but proving it would require taking on one of the most powerful men in New York. Lily closed the locket and held it in her palm. This small piece of tarnished silver was all she had. A photograph of a boy with gray eyes. A photograph of a baby with her birthmark. 20-year-old images that contradicted a 2-month-old DNA test. It should not be enough. But it had to be. She thought about Jonathan Blackwood in his penthouse, alone with his grief, convinced his sister was dead, living in a mausoleum built from the ashes of hope. She had seen his face that night in the restaurant, had seen the devastation when her sleeve slipped up, had heard him whisper a name that was not hers but might have been. If she was Emma Blackwood, he deserved to know, deserved to have his sister back, deserved to know that 20 years of searching had not been in vain. But if she was wrong, if she was just a waitress with a similar birthmark and a desperate need to belong, then confronting him would be the cruelest thing she could do, would reopen wounds that had barely scabbed over, would destroy him all over again. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders. But she had come too far to turn back now. Daniel was investigating. Victor was planning. The wheels were in motion. All she could do was wait and hope that when the truth finally emerged, it would set them both free instead of destroying them both. Across the city, Daniel Cross sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home. His computer screen glowed in the darkness, showing the web of connections he had mapped. Victor Blackwood at the center, Dr. Whitmore caught in financial debt, Margaret Chen hiding in a queen's apartment under her married name, the DNA test sitting between them all like a black box full of lies. He had made a promise to himself when John helped him find his sister, had sworn that he would do anything for the man who gave him back his family. Now he had a chance to return that gift, to give John his sister back, to end 20 years of searching with a reunion instead of a grave. But the path to that reunion was dangerous. Victor Blackwood was cornered and desperate. Cornered animals were the most dangerous kind. Daniel had seen men do terrible things when their survival was threatened. Victor had already falsified a DNA test, had already stolen millions, had already threatened a nurse to keep her silent. He would not stop there. Daniel opened a secure file on his computer and began documenting everything. Every piece of evidence, every connection, every suspicion. If something happened to him, if Victor managed to silence him, this file would survive. It was encrypted and backed up to 3 separate servers, set to automatically send to John if Daniel did not log in for 72 consecutive hours, a dead man's switch. He looked at the photograph of Lily's locket. at the boy with John's eyes and the baby with her birthmark, at the evidence that said science had lied. Daniel had spent his career trusting data and evidence and facts, but sometimes the facts were manufactured. Sometimes the data was corrupted. And when that happened, you had to trust something deeper: instinct, pattern recognition, the accumulated wisdom of experience that said something was wrong even when the numbers said everything was right. Every instinct Daniel had screamed that Lily Carter was Emma Blackwood, that Victor had falsified the DNA test to protect his theft, that the truth was buried, but not dead. And Daniel had learned long ago to trust his instincts. They had kept him alive in places where trust was the only currency that mattered. He closed his laptop and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Victor Blackwood was planning his next move. Somewhere else, Lily Carter was waiting for answers. And in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Jonathan Blackwood was alone with ghosts he could not let go. By the time the sun set on Manhattan, Victor Blackwood had set in motion a plan that would either save him or destroy everyone in his path. Daniel Cross had begun a hunt that would not end until the truth was exposed, and Lily Carter had committed to a fight that would either give her an identity or cost her everything. The war for the truth had begun, and none of them knew how much blood would be spilled before it ended. Across the city, in an office that smelled of expensive scotch and growing panic, Victor Blackwood was staring at a report from his private investigator. The report detailed a meeting between Daniel Cross and Lily Carter in Astoria Park. Photographs showed them talking, showed Carter handing Cross an envelope, showed them looking at something together. The photographs were grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but they were clear enough. Daniel and the girl were working together, building a case, connecting dots that Victor had spent 3 years trying to keep separate. Victor's hands were shaking as he poured another drink. The scotch was 30 years old and cost more than most people made in a month. It tasted like ash in his mouth. Everything was falling apart. 20 years of careful planning. 20 years of siphoning money from Emma's trust fund while playing the role of devoted uncle. 20 years of freedom built on the foundation of a buried secret. All of it was about to collapse because a waitress found a locket and a security chief had a conscience. He had underestimated Daniel Cross, had thought the man was just muscle with military training, a loyal soldier who followed orders without questioning. But Cross was more than that. He was intelligent, methodical, and most dangerous of all, he had personal experience with lost siblings. He would not stop digging until he found the truth. And the girl, Lily Carter. Victor had assumed she would take the money and disappear, had counted on her being like every other opportunist who had come forward claiming to be Emma. But she was not after money. She was after identity, truth, the one thing Victor could not afford to let her find. He pulled out his phone and dialed Dr. Whitmore. The call went to voicemail. Victor cursed and called again and again. On the fourth try, Whitmore finally answered. His voice was thick with alcohol and fear. "What do you want, Victor? I told you we should not talk anymore." "We have a problem," Victor said. "Daniel Cross is digging. The girl found photographs. They met today. They are building a case." There was silence on the line. Then Whitmore's shaky voice. "I warned you this would happen. I told you we should not have done it. It is too late for regrets, Thomas. We need to make sure there is nothing for them to find." "You deleted the backup data from the lab servers?" "Yes, I purged everything from the primary systems." "What about offsite backup?" Victor's voice was sharp. "Most labs maintain external archives for legal compliance. Did you delete those files?" More silence. Longer this time. Then Whitmore spoke in a whisper. "There might be offsite backup. The lab maintains an encrypted archive on a separate server for regulatory compliance. I did not have administrator access to delete those files." Victor closed his eyes and felt the walls closing in. So the real DNA results still exist somewhere. Possibly. But they are encrypted with military-grade security, stored on a server that requires multiple authentication protocols to access. It would take a court order and several weeks of legal process to retrieve them. "Or it would take someone with advanced hacking skills," Victor said. "And Daniel Cross has military intelligence contacts, people who specialize in breaking into encrypted systems." He ended the call and sat in his office, staring at the Manhattan skyline. The city glittered below him. 8 million people living their lives, unaware that one man's empire was about to crumble. Victor had two choices. He could run, liquidate what assets he could access, and disappear to a country without extradition treaties. The Cayman Islands, the Cook Islands, somewhere warm where money could buy protection. Or he could fight, eliminate the threats before they could expose him, silence the people who knew too much, destroy the evidence before it could be presented. It would be risky, dangerous. But Victor had not spent 20 years building his position just to run like a coward. He had resources, money, connections, friends in law enforcement who owed him favors, corporate lawyers who could bury opponents in litigation, private investigators who asked no questions as long as they were paid. He had built a network specifically for situations like this. Now he would use it. Victor made the first call to his personal attorney, a man named Harrison Thorne who specialized in making legal problems disappear. Thorne had offices in Manhattan and Hong Kong, and a reputation for aggressive tactics that sometimes crossed ethical lines. "Harrison," Victor said when the lawyer answered, "I need you to prepare something for me. A comprehensive cease and desist targeting Daniel Cross, accusations of corporate espionage, misuse of company resources, violation of employment contracts. Make it thorough enough that it will cost him his job and his security clearances." "What is the basis for these accusations?" Thorne asked. "He is conducting an unauthorized investigation using company time and resources. He is conspiring with an outsider who has already violated an NDA. Build the case around that. Make it strong enough that John will have no choice but to fire him." "Understood. I will have the paperwork ready by tomorrow morning." The second call was to a man Victor did not like, but sometimes needed. Marcus Webb ran a private security firm that operated in the gray areas between legal and illegal. Webb had ex-cops and ex-military on his payroll, people who knew how to gather information and apply pressure without leaving traces. "Marcus, I have a situation that requires your particular expertise," Victor said. "There is a woman named Lily Carter in Astoria. I need to know everything she is doing, who she talks to, where she goes, what she knows. And I need you to make her understand that continuing her current course of action would be unwise." "How unwise are we talking?" Webb asked. Nothing physical. Just make it clear that she should take her money and disappear. That continuing to ask questions will have consequences for people she cares about. Her mother just had a kidney transplant. Very expensive procedure. Would be a shame if something happened to complicate her recovery." "Understood. I will have a team on her by tonight." The third call was the most dangerous. Victor dialed a number that connected him to a detective in the NYPD's Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Raymond Shaw had been on Victor's payroll for 5 years. Small favors paid for in cash, tips about investigations, warning when audits were coming. The relationship was mutually beneficial and carefully deniable. "Ray," Victor said, "I need information. Daniel Cross, former Special Forces, currently head of security at Blackwood Global. He is conducting some kind of investigation. I need to know if he has reached out to any law enforcement agencies, if he has filed any reports or requested any records." "I can check," Shaw said. "But if he has, there will be paperwork, digital trails. You know I cannot make those disappear." "I'm not asking you to make anything disappear. Just give me advance warning. If he files for a warrant or subpoena, I need to know before it gets executed." "That I can do. Give me 24 hours. Victor ended the call and poured himself another drink. The alcohol was not helping anymore, but he kept drinking anyway. 3 phone calls, 3 different angles of attack. Between legal pressure on Daniel, physical intimidation of Lily, and inside information from law enforcement, Victor would buy himself time. Time to plan his next move. Time to decide whether to fight or flee. But even as he made these plans, Victor knew he was operating from a position of weakness. The truth was like water. It found cracks and seeped through. No matter how many walls you built, eventually it found a way out. And when it did, it would drown everything in its path. He looked at the portrait of his brother Michael hanging on the wall, the older brother who had everything, who was smarter, stronger, more successful, who even in death cast a shadow that Victor could not escape. For 20 years, Victor had told himself that he deserved the money he had taken, that Michael's death had been a cosmic correction, that Emma's disappearance had been convenient timing. But late at night, when the scotch stopped working and the silence became too loud, Victor knew the truth. He was not a victim of circumstance. He was a thief who had stolen from a child, a coward who had buried his own niece to cover his crimes. And now that child had returned to claim what was hers. The universe had a way of balancing accounts. Victor had spent 20 years running from that balance. Now it was catching up. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after the park meeting. Lily was walking home from her graphic design class when she noticed the car, a dark sedan parked across the street from her apartment building. Nothing unusual about it except that it had been there when she left that morning. Same spot, same angle, engine running. She kept walking past her building and called Daniel from a coffee shop 2 blocks away. "There is a car watching my apartment," she said without preamble. "Dark blue sedan, 2 men inside. They have been there all day." Daniel's voice was calm, but she heard the tension underneath. "Do not go home. Stay in public places. I am sending someone to pick you up." "Who is watching me?" "Victor. He knows we are investigating." This is his way of sending a message. "What kind of message?" "The kind that says he knows where you live, where your mother lives, where you go to school. He is telling you that he can reach you anytime he wants." Lily felt cold despite the warmth of the coffee shop. "Grace is at the apartment. She just got home from physical therapy." "I know, I have someone watching your building from another angle. Your mother is safe, but you need to get her out of there. Tonight. Take her somewhere Victor cannot track." "Where do we go?" "I have a place. A safe house I use for situations like this. No one knows about it except me. Stay where you are. My people will pick you up in 20 minutes. Daniel ended the call, and Lily sat in the coffee shop trying to look normal, while her heart hammered against her ribs. She had known this would be dangerous, had understood that powerful men fought back when threatened. But understanding it intellectually was different from watching strange men surveillance her home, different from knowing that her mother was a target. The pickup came exactly 20 minutes later. Not a car, but a woman on a motorcycle. She wore a leather jacket and full-face helmet. She handed Lily a second helmet without speaking, and Lily climbed on the back. They took a route through Brooklyn that twisted and turned enough to lose any tail. 40 minutes later, they pulled up to a brownstone in Park Slope. Daniel was waiting inside. The safe house was furnished but sterile, a place designed for temporary occupation. No personal touches, no photographs, just secure locks and reinforced windows, and a location that was not tied to Daniel or Blackwood Global in any way. "Your mother is already here," Daniel said. "My team picked her up 15 minutes ago. She is upstairs." Lily found Grace in a bedroom on the second floor. The older woman was sitting on the bed looking shell-shocked. Her physical therapy bag was beside her. She had been pulled from her routine without warning and brought to a stranger's house by strangers. "Mom," Lily said sitting beside her, "I am so sorry." Grace took her hand. "Baby, what have we gotten into?" "The truth. We have gotten into the truth, and some people will do anything to keep it buried." Downstairs, Daniel was on his phone coordinating security. He had pulled 3 people from his private network, ex-military contractors who owed him favors. They would rotate shifts watching the brownstone and tracking Victor's surveillance team. If Victor escalated to physical threats, Daniel would be ready. When he finished his calls, he sat across from Lily at the kitchen table. His expression was grim. "Victor is playing for keeps now," Daniel said. "The surveillance team is from Marcus Webb's firm. Webb runs a private security company that operates in gray areas. They do corporate espionage, witness intimidation, things that walk the line between legal and criminal. What do they want? They want you scared. Want you to understand that continuing this investigation has consequences. Victor is betting that the threat alone will be enough to make you stop. And if I do not stop, then he will escalate. The next step is usually more direct, threatening phone calls, vandalism, making your life difficult enough that you give up." Lily felt anger cutting through her fear. "I am not giving up, not when we are this close." Daniel nodded as if he had expected nothing less. "Then we move faster than he does. I found Margaret, the nurse who collected your sample. She is living in Flushing under her married name. I plan to talk to her tomorrow." "What if she does not want to talk?" "Everyone talks eventually. You just need to find the right pressure point." Margaret has a daughter, 12 years old. Victor threatened the girl to keep Margaret quiet. But threats work both ways. If I can convince Margaret that the only way to protect her daughter is to tell the truth, she will talk. That night, Lily lay awake in an unfamiliar bed, in an unfamiliar house, listening to the sounds of the city outside. Grace was in the next room, safe for now. But safety was temporary when you were at war with a billionaire. Victor had resources Lily could not match: money, lawyers, private security, political connections. All she had was the truth and a locket with old photographs. She thought about Jonathan Blackwood in his penthouse. Did he know his uncle was threatening people? Did he know about the surveillance and intimidation? Or was he isolated in his grief while Victor operated in the shadows? Somewhere in the same city, Daniel Cross was having the same thoughts. He sat in his own apartment reviewing files and planning the next day's approach to Margaret Chen. The nurse was the weak link. Scared people made mistakes. And if Daniel could get her to admit that something was wrong with the sample collection or chain of custody, it would be enough to justify demanding access to the lab's backup data. But Daniel was also thinking about John, about his boss and friend who was breaking slowly under the weight of 20 years of grief. John had a right to know what was happening, had a right to know that his uncle might have falsified the DNA test. But without proof, telling John would be cruel, would give him hope that might be false, would force him to choose between his uncle and the possibility of his sister being alive. Daniel had to have ironclad evidence before he went to John, had to be able to prove beyond any doubt that Lily Carter was Emma Blackwood. Anything less would destroy whatever was left of John's ability to hope. The next morning, Daniel drove to Flushing alone. The address he had for Margaret Chen was a modest apartment building on a quiet street, the kind of place where people kept to themselves and did not ask questions. He watched the building for an hour before approaching, saw Margaret leave at 8:30 to walk her daughter to school, saw her return alone 20 minutes later. He gave her time to settle in before knocking on her door. Margaret answered wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. Her face went pale when she saw Daniel standing in the hallway. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice shaking, "I cannot talk to you. I signed papers. I was told if I talked to anyone there would be consequences." "I know about the threats, Margaret. I know Victor Blackwood called you, told you to forget about the sample you collected, told you what would happen if you talked." Margaret tried to close the door, but Daniel put his foot in the gap. Not aggressive, just firm. He kept his voice gentle, non-threatening. "I am not here to hurt you or your daughter. I am here because I think you saw something that day. Something that did not sit right, and I think it has been eating at you ever since." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Please leave. I cannot help you." "Did the sample leave your sight at any point between collection and sealing? Did anyone else handle it? Was there any break in the chain of custody?" "I collected it properly. I followed all the protocols. I sealed it and logged it and sent it to the lab. But something was wrong." Daniel said it as a statement, not a question. "You noticed something." Margaret was crying now, silent tears running down her face. "I cannot talk about this. My daughter. They know where she goes to school. They know everything about us." Daniel pulled out his phone and showed Margaret a photograph. It was Lily's locket, the pictures of the boy and the baby, the identical birthmarks. He let Margaret study it for a long moment. "That woman with the birthmark," Daniel said quietly. "I think she is Jonathan Blackwood's sister, the sister who has been missing for 20 years. And I think the DNA test that said otherwise was falsified. If I am right, then the people who threatened you are not just covering up fraud. They are keeping a family separated. They are making a man believe his sister is dead when she is alive." Margaret stared at the photographs. Her hands were shaking. "That birthmark," she whispered. "It was identical to the one in Mr. Blackwood's file. I noticed it when I logged the sample. I thought it was strange. Thought maybe the test would come back positive." "What happened after you collected the sample?" "Nothing unusual. I sealed it, labeled it, put it in the courier bag. The driver came to pick it up 20 minutes later." "Do you remember the driver's name?" Margaret closed her eyes, trying to remember. It was not the regular driver. Usually we get the same guy from the lab. But that day it was someone different. Older. He had credentials. Proper paperwork. But he was not the usual courier. Did you get his name?" She shook her head. "He showed ID, but I do not remember the name. I just remember thinking it was odd that they sent someone different." Daniel felt something click into place. Victor had intercepted the sample, had sent his own courier to collect it instead of the regular lab driver. That was how he had ensured the test would be falsified. The sample had never made it to the lab untampered. "Margaret, I need you to write down everything you remember about that day. Every detail. what time the sample was collected, what time the courier arrived, what he looked like, any identifying marks or characteristics. Can you do that for me? If I do this, if I help you, can you protect my daughter? Daniel thought about the resources he had, about the men he knew who specialized in protection, about safe houses and security protocols and ways to disappear people when necessary. It would cost him, would burn favors. But if it helped prove Lily was Emma, it was worth any price. I can protect both of you. I have a place you can stay, secure, off the grid. No one will find you there. But I need your statement. I need your testimony about the chain of custody being broken. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Let me get some paper. While Margaret wrote her statement, Daniel called his contact at a private security firm he trusted, not Marcus Webb's company. These were people who owed Daniel their lives from operations that never officially happened. Within an hour, Margaret and her daughter would be relocated to a secure location. Victor would not find them. Margaret finished writing and handed Daniel 3 pages of detailed notes. Times, descriptions, observations, everything that had seemed off about that day. It was not proof of falsification, but it was evidence that the chain of custody had been compromised. Combined with the financial connections between Victor and Dr. Whitmore, it was enough to justify a warrant for the lab's backup data. But getting that warrant required going through official channels, required involving law enforcement, and that was where things would get complicated. Victor had connections in the NYPD, had people who would tip him off if warrants were being filed. Daniel needed a way around that. He needed someone who was both inside the system and willing to bend rules for the right reasons. He needed someone who hated corruption more than they valued procedure. And he knew exactly who to call. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen had worked with Daniel years ago on a joint task force involving military contractors and fraud. They had stayed in touch. Sarah was the kind of agent who cared more about results than politics, who would push boundaries if the case was righteous. And a falsified DNA test that kept siblings separated qualified as righteous in Daniel's book. He called her from his car after leaving Margaret's apartment. Sarah, I need a favor, a big one. They met at a diner in Manhattan. Sarah was in her 40s with sharp eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen too much corruption to be shocked by it anymore. She listened to Daniel's story without interrupting. When he finished, she sat back and let out a long breath. You are asking me to get a warrant for a genetics lab based on chain of custody issues and financial connections to the suspect's uncle. That is thin, Daniel. It is not just thin evidence. It is a pattern. Victor Blackwood has motive. He has been embezzling from his niece's trust fund for 20 years. If Emma comes back and claims that money, he goes to prison. He had the means. He has financial leverage over the lab director. And he had opportunity. He intercepted the sample before it reached the lab. Can you prove he intercepted it? I have testimony from the nurse that an unknown courier picked up the sample instead of the regular driver. And I have evidence that suggests Dr. Whitmore at Genetech Labs falsified the results. Suggests or proves? Sarah shook her head. I cannot get a warrant on suggests, Daniel. I need hard evidence, something concrete that shows the test was falsified. The backup data. Every genetics lab maintains encrypted backup of all test results for legal compliance. If Whitmore falsified the results, the real data still exists on those servers. But we need a warrant to access them. And to get the warrant, I need evidence of falsification, which is on the servers I need the warrant to access. Sarah smiled grimly. Classic catch-22. Not if we can access the servers another way. Sarah's expression hardened. Daniel, if you are suggesting what I think you are suggesting, I cannot be part of it. I am a federal agent. I cannot sanction illegal hacking. I am not asking you to sanction anything. I am asking you to tell me that if someone hypothetically accessed those servers and found evidence of falsification, you would be willing to act on that evidence. That depends on how the evidence was obtained. If it came from an illegal hack, it would not be admissible in court. But it would give you probable cause to get a warrant for the physical servers. Once you have a legal warrant, you find the same data through legitimate means. The illegal evidence points you to the legal evidence. Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was careful. I did not hear any of what you just said. But hypothetically, if someone were to provide me with information that suggested evidence of a crime existed in a specific location, I would have grounds to pursue a warrant. Hypothetically, they parted ways with an understanding. Daniel would find a way to access the encrypted backup servers. What he found would be passed to Sarah through channels that protected both of them. Sarah would use that information to get a legitimate warrant. And when the warrant was executed, they would have legal proof that the DNA test had been falsified. Daniel's next call was to someone he had not spoken to in 3 years. Marcus Cole was ex-NSA, a hacker who had left government service after getting burned by bureaucracy. He now worked freelance doing penetration testing for corporations who wanted to know how vulnerable their systems were. He was one of the best in the world at breaking into places he was not supposed to be. They met at a bar in Brooklyn. Marcus was younger than Daniel by 10 years, with the pale skin of someone who spent most of their time in front of computer screens. He listened to Daniel's request with growing interest. "You want me to break into Genetech Labs' encrypted backup servers," Marcus said. "That is not easy. They use military-grade encryption, multiple authentication protocols, intrusion detection systems. But it can be done," Marcus smiled. "Everything can be done. The question is how long it takes and how much you are willing to pay. Money is not a problem. Time might be. Victor Blackwood knows we are investigating. He is actively working to shut us down. We need to move fast. Give me 72 hours. I will need physical access to their network to bypass some of the security. Can you get me inside the building? I can get you janitorial credentials. Night shift. You will have access to the office floors, but not the lab areas. That is enough. I just need to plug into their internal network. From there, I can work my way to the backup servers." They worked out the details. Timing, access, payment. Marcus would go in tomorrow night, would have 12 hours to break through the encryption and download whatever data existed from Lily Carter's DNA test. If the real results showed she was Emma Blackwood, they would have their proof. If not, they would know for certain that Lily was chasing a dead end. Daniel drove back to the safe house in Park Slope feeling the weight of what he was setting in motion. He was coordinating an illegal hack of a medical facility, was using federal resources without authorization, was putting his career and freedom at risk. If this went wrong, he would lose everything. But if it went right, he would give John his sister back, and that was worth any risk. At the safe house, Lily was going stir-crazy. She was not used to being trapped indoors, not used to having armed guards rotating shifts outside. Grace handled it better, spent her time reading and cooking and maintaining a calm that Lily could not match. When Daniel returned that evening, Lily met him at the door. "Tell me we are making progress," she said. "We are. I spoke with Margaret. She confirmed the chain of custody was compromised, and I have someone working on accessing the lab's backup servers. If the real DNA results exist, we will have them in 72 hours. And then what? Then we take everything to the FBI, the financial evidence, Margaret's testimony, the backup data, and we let the system do its job." "You trust the system?" Daniel thought about Sarah Chen, about the federal agents he had worked with who genuinely wanted justice, about the fact that even corrupt systems had people inside them who still believed in doing the right thing. "I trust that enough people in the system are good that the truth will win out. Eventually." That night, across the city in a very different kind of safe space, Victor Blackwood was losing his mind. His surveillance team had lost track of Lily Carter. She had disappeared along with her mother. Daniel Cross had pulled them to a location Victor could not find. That meant Cross had resources and planning that Victor had underestimated. Worse, Margaret Chen was also missing. Victor's contact at the private security firm reported that Margaret and her daughter had vanished from their Flushing apartment. No forwarding address, no paper trail, just gone. Daniel was moving pieces around the board faster than Victor could counter them. The investigation was accelerating, and Victor was running out of options. He called his lawyer Harrison Thorne at midnight. "We need to move now," Victor said. "File the corporate espionage complaint against Cross. Get him fired and stripped of his security clearances. I want him neutralized." "That will take time," Thorne said. "We need to build the case, gather evidence." "We do not have time. Cross is digging into things that cannot be exposed. I need him stopped now. If we move too fast, it will look suspicious, like we are trying to silence him. That could backfire." "I do not care how it looks. Do it." Victor ended the call and poured himself another drink. His hands were shaking badly now. The scotch was not helping anymore, but he kept drinking because it was the only thing keeping the panic at bay. Everything was falling apart. 20 years of careful planning unraveling in a matter of weeks. He thought about running, about liquidating what assets he could access and disappearing to a country that would not extradite him. The Cayman Islands, Brazil, somewhere warm where money bought protection and questions were not asked. He had prepared for this contingency years ago, had offshore accounts and false identities ready. But running meant admitting defeat, meant abandoning the life he had built. The position, the respect, the power. Victor had spent his entire life trying to escape his brother's shadow. Running would mean that Shadow had won. He picked up his phone and called Marcus Webb. "I need you to escalate," Victor said. "The surveillance is not working. They have gone to ground. I need you to find them, and I need you to apply more direct pressure." "What kind of pressure are we talking about?" Webb asked. "Whatever it takes to make them stop. Short of anything that puts bodies in the ground. Make them understand that continuing this investigation will cost them more than it is worth. That is going to cost extra. I do not care what it costs, just do it." Victor ended the call and sat alone in his office, staring at the portrait of his brother. Michael Blackwood looked down at him with the same expression he had worn in life: disappointment, judgment, the certainty that Victor would never measure up. "You did this," Victor whispered to the portrait. "You left everything to a child and expected me to manage it faithfully. You gave me responsibility without power. You set up that trust fund for Emma and made it untouchable. You forced me to steal." But the portrait did not answer. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the scotch and the panic and the desperate rationalizations, Victor knew the truth. He had stolen because he wanted to, because he believed he deserved it, because his resentment and envy had grown into a cancer that corrupted everything it touched. And now that cancer was killing him. The next night, Marcus Cole entered the Genetech Labs building wearing a janitor's uniform and carrying a bucket full of cleaning supplies. Under the supplies was a laptop with specialized hardware designed to penetrate secure networks. He had credentials that said his name was David Martinez, and he worked for the building's cleaning service. The night security guard barely looked at his ID before waving him through. Marcus took the elevator to the 4th floor where Genetech's administrative offices were located. The lab areas were locked down tight, but the offices had normal security. He found an empty conference room and plugged a device no bigger than a USB drive into the Ethernet port. The device established a connection to the internal network. From there, Marcus could work remotely. He left the building after an hour of pretending to clean and went back to his apartment in Queens. Now came the hard part: breaking through the encryption. He worked through the night. The backup servers were protected by layers of security that would have stopped most hackers cold. Firewalls designed by people who understood how intrusions happened. Authentication protocols that required multiple credentials Marcus did not have. Intrusion detection systems that monitored every packet of data moving through the network, watching for patterns that suggested unauthorized access. Marcus had to work slowly, methodically, like a safecracker listening for the click of tumblers. He probed the firewall looking for vulnerabilities, found a weakness in how it handled certain types of network traffic, exploited that weakness to inject his own code into the system. The code created a backdoor, a hidden entrance that the firewall did not recognize as unauthorized. From there, he worked his way deeper into the network. Each layer of security required a different approach. The authentication protocols were harder. They required credentials he did not have, but they also required the system to check those credentials against a database. Marcus intercepted those checks, watched the encrypted traffic flow back and forth, used the patterns to build a profile of legitimate credentials. It took 12 hours to create a fake credential set that would pass inspection. Another 6 hours to test it without triggering alarms. When he finally used it to access the backup servers, his hands were shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. But the final layer was proving impossible. The encryption was cutting edge, advanced encryption standard with a 256-bit key, military-grade security that would take years to brute force even with massive computing power. The only way through was to find the key itself, and that key was stored somewhere in the lab's physical security systems Marcus could not access remotely. He needed a different approach. Needed to think like the people who designed the system. They would have created a way to recover encrypted data if the keys were lost. A backup decryption method for emergencies. That method would be documented somewhere. In maintenance logs, in system administrator notes, in the training materials for lab staff. Marcus spent another 8 hours searching through every document he could access on the network. Personnel files, training manuals, system logs. Everything was encrypted, but he had broken enough of the security to read most of it. He was looking for a pattern, a hint about where the backup decryption keys were stored. He found it in an old email thread between system administrators. They were discussing a protocol update. One of them mentioned that the backup keys were stored in a secure vault that required biometric authentication. But they also mentioned that the vault system logged every access attempt, including the credentials used. Marcus found the vault logs, found a record of the last time someone accessed the backup encryption keys. The access had happened 2 months ago, right after Lily Carter's DNA sample was collected. The credential used belonged to Dr. Thomas Whitmore. That was the smoking gun. Whitmore had accessed the backup encryption keys at exactly the time he would have needed them to falsify Lily's results and then re-encrypt the fake data. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. But Marcus still needed the actual data, needed to decrypt the files and see what Lily's real DNA results showed. He worked for another 6 hours trying different approaches. Finally found a vulnerability in how the vault system handled biometric authentication. Use that vulnerability to extract a copy of the backup encryption keys. With the keys in hand, decryption was straightforward. He downloaded every file related to Lily Carter's DNA test, the raw sequencing data, the analysis results, the comparison against Jonathan Blackwood's genetic profile, everything. He called Daniel at 6 p.m. after 36 hours of continuous work. I am in their systems, but the final encryption took longer than expected. But I have it. I have everything. The raw data, the logs, the access records, all of it. What do the results show? Daniel asked, his heart pounding. You need to see this yourself. I am sending you the files now. But Daniel, this is big, the real results. They show a 99.97% probability that Lily Carter and Jonathan Blackwood are biological siblings. Someone falsified the negative results, and I can prove exactly how they did it. Daniel cursed silently. They did not have 48 hours. Victor was escalating. Every day they waited was another day for Victor to move against them. But there was no choice. They needed that data. Do what you have to do, Daniel said. But Marcus, be careful. If they detect the intrusion, they will lock down everything. We only get one shot at this. Hot. I am always careful, Marcus said. That is why I am still free. While Marcus worked on breaking the encryption, Victor's escalation came faster than anyone expected. But before that storm hit, something else was happening in the penthouse overlooking Central Park. Jonathan Blackwood could not sleep. Again. It had been 2 months since the negative DNA test, and he should have moved on by now. Should have accepted that Lily Carter was not Emma. Should have buried his sister's memory and focused on the living. But something would not let him rest. It was the birthmark, that perfect crescent moon with its single star. He had seen it so clearly that night at the restaurant, had recognized it instantly. How could two people have the exact same mark in the exact same location? What were the statistical odds? He pulled up genetic research on his computer at 3 in the morning, read papers about birthmarks and pigmentation, learned that while birthmarks were common, having the exact same configuration in the exact same location was extremely rare. Not impossible, but rare enough to be noteworthy. The DNA test said 0% probability. Science said they were not related. But John's gut, the same instinct that had built a billion-dollar empire, said something was wrong. He could not articulate what, could not point to specific evidence, but the feeling persisted like a splinter he could not remove. He called Daniel the next morning. His head of security did not answer. That was unusual. Daniel always answered John's calls. Always. John tried again an hour later. Still no answer. He called Daniel's assistant. "Where is Cross?" John asked. "I am not sure, Mr. Blackwood. He took personal time, said it was urgent." Personal time. Daniel never took personal time. In 6 years, John could count on one hand the number of days Daniel had taken off, and he had never done so without advance notice. John's instincts sharpened. Something was happening, something Daniel was involved in, something important enough to ignore his boss's calls. He called his Uncle Victor. The older man answered on the third ring. His voice was rough, like he had been drinking. "Jonathan," Victor said, "what can I do for you?" "Have you seen Daniel Cross lately?" There was a pause, just long enough to be noticeable. "Cross? No. Why?" "He is not answering my calls. Took personal time without notice. That is not like him." "Maybe he is finally taking a vacation," Victor said. "The man works too hard, probably needed a break." Something in Victor's tone was off. Too casual, too quick to dismiss. John had spent his entire career reading people, detecting lies. Victor was hiding something. "Do you know something I do not?" John asked carefully. Another pause. Then Victor's voice changed, became more serious. "Jonathan, there is something I need to tell you. I did not want to worry you, but Daniel has been conducting an unauthorized investigation, using company resources for personal matters. I have been working with legal to address it." "What kind of investigation?" Victor hesitated, then said, "He has been looking into Lily Carter, the waitress from the DNA test. I think he became obsessed with the case, started questioning the results, wasting time and resources on a dead end." John felt something cold slide down his spine. Daniel was investigating Lily Carter, questioning the DNA results. That meant Daniel suspected what John had been unable to articulate, that something about the negative test was wrong. "Why did you not tell me this?" John asked. "Because I knew it would upset you. You have been through enough. The last thing you needed was false hope. The DNA test was definitive, Jonathan. That woman is not Emma. Daniel needs to accept that and move on." "But what if he is right? What if something was wrong with the test?" "There was nothing wrong with the test," Victor said firmly. "It was conducted by the best lab in the country. The results were clear. 0% probability. You need to let this go, Jonathan. And you need to let Daniel go. He has violated his employment contract. He has misused company resources. He needs to be terminated." John ended the call without responding. His mind was racing. Victor wanted Daniel fired. That by itself was suspicious. Victor had never cared about employment issues before, never involved himself in personnel matters. The fact that he was pushing so hard to get Daniel terminated suggested he was threatened by whatever Daniel had found. John made a decision. If Daniel was investigating Lily Carter, then John needed to know what Daniel had discovered. He called Daniel's assistant again. "I need you to access Cross's office. I need copies of any files related to Lily Carter or the DNA test from 2 months ago. Can you do that?" The assistant hesitated. "Mr. Blackwood, that feels like a violation of privacy. I am the CEO of this company. Everything in that office belongs to the company. Get me those files." Within an hour, John had copies of everything on Daniel's computer. The files were extensive. Financial records linking Victor to Dr. Whitmore. Evidence of gambling debts paid off. Chain of custody issues with the DNA sample. Testimony from a nurse named Margaret Chen. John read through everything twice. The pattern was undeniable. Victor had motive to falsify the DNA test, had means through his financial leverage over Whitmore, had opportunity by intercepting the sample. Daniel had built a comprehensive case suggesting the negative results were fraudulent, and John's uncle, the man who had raised him after his parents died, had apparently stolen $36 million from Emma's trust fund. John sat in his office staring at the evidence. 20 years of grief, 20 years of searching. And all that time, his uncle had been embezzling from the fund set up for Emma, had apparently lied about DNA results to keep that theft hidden. If this was true, if Lily Carter really was Emma, then Victor had kept them apart for 20 years to protect himself. The rage that filled John was cold and precise. Not the hot anger of impulse, but the calculated fury of a man who had just discovered the depth of betrayal. He picked up his phone and called his personal attorney, not the corporate lawyers, his private counsel who handled family matters. "I need you to freeze all accounts associated with my uncle Victor Blackwood. Everything he has access to through the company. I need it done immediately and quietly." "May I ask why?" "I believe he has been embezzling from a family trust fund. I need him isolated before he can move assets offshore." The attorney promised to have it done within hours. John ended the call and sat alone in his office looking out at the city. If Daniel was right, if Lily Carter was Emma, then she was out there somewhere. Alive, real, within reach. After 20 years of searching, his sister had been found and then lost again because of a lie. He would find her, would find Daniel, would get to the truth, And when he did, Victor would pay for every year of suffering he had caused. While John was discovering the truth in his office, the fire at the safe house was already being set. It started with accelerant poured through a basement window, a delayed ignition device that would give the arsonist time to disappear before the flames caught. Professional work, the kind Marcus Webb's people specialized in. Grace woke at 3 a.m. to the smell of smoke. She stumbled out of bed confused and disoriented. Smoke was seeping under the door of her bedroom at the safe house. She opened the door and found the hallway thick with gray smoke. She screamed for Lily. Daniel's security team was already responding. One of them had seen the smoke and called it in. By the time fire trucks arrived, the brownstone was fully involved. Flames were visible through the second-story windows. The fire department evacuated everyone to the street. They stood on the sidewalk in their pajamas watching the fire crews work. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, his face grim. "This was not an accident," he said. "This was arson. Victor is done playing games." Grace was shaking. "They tried to kill us." "No. If Victor wanted you dead, you would be dead." This was a message. He is showing us that he can reach us anywhere, that no safe house is truly safe. Lily felt rage and fear mixing into something cold and hard in her chest. "We need to finish this. Now. Before he actually kills someone." "I have Marcus working on it. We will have the backup data soon." "How soon?" "Another day, maybe 2. We do not have 2 days." Lily gestured at the burning building. "This is what one night looks like. What happens tomorrow night? What happens when Victor decides that messages are not enough?" Daniel did not have an answer for that, because she was right. Victor was escalating faster than Daniel had anticipated. The next move would be more direct, more violent. They were running out of time. He made a decision, called Sarah Chen at the FBI, told her about the arson, told her they needed protection. Sarah agreed to arrange something. Within an hour, federal agents were on site, taking statements, documenting evidence. The safe house was now a crime scene, which meant it was under federal jurisdiction, which meant Victor could not touch it without risking federal charges. But it also meant Lily and Grace needed a new place to stay, somewhere even Victor could not reach. Sarah arranged for them to be placed in a federal witness protection safe house, the kind used for mafia informants and terrorism witnesses. High security, armed guards, constant surveillance. As Daniel drove them to the new location, Lily stared out the window at the city passing by. Somewhere out there, Jonathan Blackwood was alone in his penthouse, unaware that his uncle was burning buildings and threatening people. Unaware that the sister he thought was dead might actually be alive. She wanted to go to him, wanted to tell him everything. But Daniel was right. They needed proof first, needed absolute certainty, because giving him hope just to take it away again would be the cruelest thing they could do. So she stayed silent and patient and waited for Marcus to crack the encryption, waited for the truth that was buried in those backup servers, waited for the moment when she could finally look Jonathan Blackwood in the eye and tell him who she really was. If she survived that long, the files arrived at John's private email at 7 in the morning. Daniel had sent them from an encrypted account with a subject line that said only, "The truth." John opened the attachments in his penthouse office with hands that trembled despite his attempts at control. The first file was the raw genetic data from Lily Carter's DNA test. Not the falsified report that said 0% probability, but the real results. The numbers were clear and undeniable. 15 genetic markers compared between Lily Carter and Jonathan Blackwood. 14 showed shared maternal DNA. 13 showed shared paternal DNA. The computer analysis was definitive. Probability of sibling relationship, 99.97%. Emma, she was alive. She had been alive this whole time. John sat in his chair and felt 20 years of grief crack open. Not gently, not with relief, with the violence of a dam breaking. Everything he had built, every wall he had constructed around his heart, every defense mechanism that had kept him functioning, shattered in the span of seconds. He had thought she was dead, had accepted it, had mourned her and moved on as best he could. But she had been alive, working in a restaurant, struggling to pay medical bills, living 10 miles away from him while he searched the world for her ghost. The second file was worse. It was a forensic analysis of the falsification. Marcus had documented everything. The access log showing Victor's visits to Genentech labs, the financial transactions that paid off Whitmore's gambling debts, the timestamps proving Whitmore had accessed the backup encryption keys at the exact moment he would have needed them to alter the results. The testimony from Margaret Chen about the chain of custody being broken. Victor had done this. His uncle, the man who had raised him after his parents died, had known Emma was alive and had buried that knowledge to protect his theft. For 20 years, Victor had looked John in the eye and lied, had played the supportive uncle while counting stolen millions. The third file was a video. John almost did not open it, but the file name said lock it and he had to know. The video showed photographs. A young boy with John's face, a baby with a crescent moon birthmark. The images were old and faded, but unmistakable. This was physical evidence that matched the genetic proof. Emma had carried these photographs her entire life, had looked at her brother's face without knowing who he was. John played the video 3 times. Each viewing felt like a knife twisting deeper. She had been so close that they had been in the same room. He had looked into her eyes that night at the restaurant, had seen the confusion on her face when he whispered Emma's name. She had not known, had not recognized him, because he was a stranger to her. 20 years stolen. An entire childhood and adolescence they should have shared. Memories they should have made together. All of it gone because one man valued money more than family. John stood from his desk and walked to the windows. The sun was rising over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, Emma was hiding in a federal safe house, scared, threatened, surrounded by strangers because her own uncle had tried to kill her. The rage that filled John was absolute, cold, surgical, the kind of anger that did not shout or break things, the kind that planned and executed with ruthless precision. He picked up his phone and made 4 calls. The first was to his attorney. Execute the account freeze, every asset Victor has access to. I want him financially isolated within the hour. The second was to the board of directors. Emergency meeting at 9 a.m. Victor Blackwood is to be removed from all positions immediately. Security will escort him from the building. The third was to the FBI. He asked for Special Agent Sarah Chen by name. When she answered, John's voice was perfectly controlled. Agent Chen, my name is Jonathan Blackwood. I believe you are working with my head of security, Daniel Cross, on a matter involving DNA test fraud and embezzlement. I am prepared to provide full cooperation and resources. I want my uncle arrested today. The fourth call was to Daniel. His security chief answered on the first ring. Where is she? John asked. Federal safe house in Queens. She is protected. Victor cannot reach her. I need to see her today. Daniel was quiet for a moment. John, you should know that she does not remember you. She has no memory of her life before age 3. You are going to be a stranger to her. I do not care. I need to see my sister. Then I will make it happen. But John, you need to prepare yourself. This is not going to be the reunion you have imagined. She has spent 25 years as Lily Carter. Emma Blackwood is someone she does not know. She is still my sister. Nothing changes that. Across the city, in the federal safe house, Lily woke to Daniel standing in her doorway. His face was different. Not tense or worried, but resolved. Like a man who had finished a difficult mission and was ready to come home. It is done, he said. We have the proof. The real DNA results. You are Emma Blackwood. You are John's sister. Lily sat up slowly. She had been waiting for this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, she felt paralyzed. Saying the words out loud made them real in a way they had not been before. You are sure? She asked. 99.97% certain. The genetic evidence is undeniable. And we have proof that Victor falsified the original test. The FBI is moving to arrest him this morning. Grace appeared in the doorway beside Daniel. Her face was carefully neutral, but Lily could see the fear beneath. Fear that she was about to lose her daughter. That blood would prove stronger than 20 years of chosen family. Mom, Lily said. Grace came to sit beside her on the bed. Baby, this does not change anything between us. You know that, right? You are still my daughter. But I'm also his sister. Yes, you are both. Love does not divide. It multiplies. Daniel cleared his throat. John wants to meet you. Today. He knows everything now. He knows you are alive. And he wants to see you. Lily felt her chest tighten. She had thought about this moment countless times. Had imagined what she would say to the brother she could not remember. But now that it was real, the words would not come. "What do I say to him?" she asked. "How do I tell a man who has been searching for 20 years that his sister does not remember him? That she does not remember their parents or their childhood or anything that mattered to him?" "You tell him the truth," Daniel said. "That is all any of us can do. Tell him the truth and let him decide what comes next." 2 hours later, arrangements had been made. Not at the safe house where security protocols were too rigid. Not at John's penthouse where the memories would be too painful. Instead, they would meet at Daniel's apartment. Neutral ground, a place that belonged to neither of them. John arrived first. He wore a suit because he did not know how to be anything other than what he was. But his tie was loose, and his hair was uncombed, and the careful control he always maintained was fractured. He looked like a man who had not slept, who had spent the night being unmade and remade by the truth. Daniel met him at the door. "John, before she gets here, you need to understand something. She is not the little girl you remember. She is a woman who has lived an entire life without you. She does not remember Emma Blackwood. She only knows Lily Carter." "I understand." "Do you? Because the way you are looking right now, you are expecting your 5-year-old sister to walk through that door. That is not who is coming. The woman you are about to meet is 25 years old. She has her own life, her own family, her own identity. You cannot expect her to just become Emma again. I just want to see her, to know she is alive. Everything else we can figure out." Daniel nodded and stepped aside. John walked into the apartment and stood in the living room looking lost. This was a man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation. But facing his sister after 20 years had stripped away every bit of armor he possessed. The knock came 15 minutes later. Daniel opened the door and Lily stood in the hallway with Grace beside her. She wore jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair was pulled back. She looked nervous and young, and nothing like the corporate executive John had become. They were strangers divided by 2 decades, and a gulf of experience neither could bridge alone. Lily stepped into the apartment and saw John standing by the windows. She had seen him before, of course, that night at the restaurant when he dropped his glass. But then he had been a powerful billionaire in an expensive suit. Now he looked human, vulnerable, like someone who had spent 20 years carrying a weight he could finally put down. They stared at each other across Daniel's living room, neither knowing how to begin. What do you say to family you do not remember? What do you say to a sister you thought was dead? John broke the silence first. His voice was rough, uncertain, nothing like the confident CEO the world knew. "I do not expect you to remember me. Daniel said you have no memory of your life before you were found. I understand that. But I need you to know that I looked for you every single day for 20 years. I never stopped. I never gave up." Lily felt tears building. "I'm sorry, I do not remember. I wish I could. I wish I could remember our parents or our house or you. But it is just blank, like those years never existed." "They existed," John said. "And I remember them for both of us. If you want, I can tell you about them. About who you were. About our family." "I would like that." Grace squeezed Lily's hand and then stepped back to give them space. This was not her moment. This was something these two people needed to navigate alone. She moved to stand beside Daniel near the kitchen, both of them silent witnesses to a reunion 20 years in the making. John reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the photograph he had carried for 2 decades, the family portrait taken 3 days before the crash. He handed it to Lily with hands that shook. "This is us. You were 5 years old. That teddy bear you are holding, his name was Mr. Bear. Very creative, I know. You took him everywhere. You would not sleep without him." Lily studied the photograph. The little blonde girl with the gap-toothed smile could have been anyone, could have been a stranger's child. But the birthmark on her wrist was identical to the one Lily carried. And the boy standing protectively behind her had the same gray eyes that were now watching her with desperate hope. "Tell me about them," Lily said quietly. "Our parents." John sat down on the couch, and Lily sat across from him. Grace and Daniel faded into the background, giving them the illusion of privacy, even though they remained close enough to intervene if needed. "Our mother was Catherine," John began. "She was a musician, played piano. She used to sing to you every night, a lullaby that she made up. It had no words, just a melody. She said it was your song, that she had written it the day you were born." Something flickered in Lily's mind. Not a memory exactly, more like an echo, a sense of familiarity she could not place. "Do you remember the melody?" John hesitated. Then he began to hum, softly, uncertainly, a simple tune that rose and fell like waves. It was beautiful and sad and somehow ancient, like something that had existed forever. And Lily felt her breath catch, because she knew that melody, had known it her entire life. She had hummed it to herself when she was scared, had sung it quietly when she could not sleep. It was the only thing from her past that had survived the amnesia, the only thread connecting her to a life she could not remember. Without thinking, she joined him, humming the second phrase of the melody while John continued with the first. They harmonized naturally, perfectly, like they had done this 1,000 times before. The lullaby filled the apartment, two voices separated by 20 years finding their way back to each other through a song. When the melody ended, John was crying, not trying to hide it or control it, just letting the tears fall. His voice was broken when he spoke. "You remember, you do remember." "I remember the song," Lily whispered. "I have always known it. I just never knew where it came from. I thought I made it up. Mom sang it to you every night. She would sit on the edge of your bed and hum while you fell asleep. You asked her to teach it to me so I could sing it when she was not there. So I learned it. I sang it to you hundreds of times." The dam inside Lily broke. 25 years of feeling rootless and lost. 25 years of wondering where she came from and why she had been abandoned. All of it came pouring out in tears she could not control. She was not crying because she remembered. She was crying because she finally knew she was not alone, had never been alone. Someone had been looking for her all this time. John moved to sit beside her and hesitantly put his arm around her shoulders. He did not know if it was allowed, did not know if she would pull away, but she leaned into him and cried against his shoulder, crying for the childhood she had lost, for the parents she would never know, for the brother who had spent 20 years searching, for all the time they could never get back. Grace watched from across the room with her own tears falling. This was what she had known would happen, what she had feared and hoped for in equal measure. Lily had found her blood family, and Grace would have to share her daughter with people who had a claim that predated her own. But she also knew that love was not a finite resource, that Lily loving John did not mean Lily loved her less. She caught John's eye across the room and saw the gratitude there. The understanding that Grace had kept his sister alive and safe when he could not, that without Grace, this moment would never have happened. They sat like that for a long time, brother and sister, strangers and family, separated by 20 years but connected by a lullaby and a birthmark and a bond that DNA could prove but could not explain. Eventually, Lily pulled back and wiped her eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," John said, "we go to the police and we make sure Victor pays for what he did, and then we figure out the rest as we go. I am not going to pressure you to be someone you are not. You are Lily Carter. That is who you have been for 20 years, and I would never ask you to give that up. But you are also Emma Blackwood, my sister. And if you are willing, I would like to be part of your life." "I think I would like that too." The arrest happened at noon, but before the FBI arrived, John had one piece of business to handle personally. He went to Victor's office on the 78th floor. His uncle was packing papers into a briefcase, preparing to run. He looked up when John entered, and for a moment their eyes met. 20 years of lies hanging between them. "You know," Victor said, "it was not a question. I know everything. The embezzlement, the falsified DNA test, the threats against Lily and her mother. All of it." Victor's face hardened. "She is not Lily. She is Emma. Your sister, the sister I raised you to forget, the sister whose trust fund I managed faithfully for years before the medical expenses and legal fees and management costs added up. You stole $36 million, John said, his voice deadly calm. You looked me in the eye every day for 20 years and lied. You let me believe my sister was dead while you counted the money you stole from her. I gave you a life, Victor spat back. After your parents died, who took you in? Who made sure you had everything you needed? Who helped you build this company into what it is today? I deserved compensation for that. You deserved nothing. You were family. That was supposed to mean something. Family? Victor laughed bitterly. I was never family to your father. I was the spare, the backup, the one who got nothing while Michael got everything. Even in death, he made sure I would always be second. That trust fund for Emma was his way of saying I could never be trusted with the real money. So you proved him right. You stole from a child to feel important. I did what I had to do to survive in a world that gave me nothing. And when that waitress showed up with her convenient birthmark, I did what was necessary to protect what I had built. If you had just accepted the negative DNA test, none of this would have happened. The girl would have her money. You would have your closure. Everyone would have moved on. Except Emma would still be a stranger to me. I would still believe my sister was dead. You would rob me of 20 years with the only family I have left, for money. Victor's defenses crumbled. His face sagged. The anger drained away, leaving only exhaustion. I did not mean for it to go this far. When I first started taking from the trust, I told myself it was temporary, that I would pay it back. But the debt kept growing, and the lies kept piling up. And then suddenly 20 years had passed and I was in too deep to stop. You could have stopped at any time, could have confessed, could have done the right thing. The right thing, Victor repeated hollowly. The right thing was what Michael always did. Perfect Michael. Brilliant Michael. Michael who never made a mistake in his life. Well, I am not Michael, I never was, and I am tired of pretending. The door opened and FBI agents entered with Sarah Chen leading them. She looked at John and he nodded. He had said what he needed to say. Now justice would take its course. Victor Blackwood, Sarah Chen said, you are under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. The executives who had been watching from the hallway stood in stunned silence as Victor was handcuffed and led from the room. His face was gray, defeated. The man who had spent his life resenting his brother's shadow had finally stepped into the light, and what everyone saw was not a victim of circumstance, but a thief who had stolen from family. John watched from the doorway. His expression was cold, unforgiving. This was justice, long delayed, but finally delivered. As Victor was led past him, the older man stopped and looked at his nephew one last time. I am sorry, Victor whispered. For what it is worth, I am sorry. John said nothing, just watched as the man who had raised him was taken away. Sorry did not give him back 20 years with his sister. Sorry did not undo the pain or erase the betrayal. Sorry was just a word. And words, John had learned, meant nothing without actions to support them. At the same time, agents were arresting Dr. Whitmore at Genetech Labs. The geneticist had been in his office reviewing test results when they arrived. He did not resist, did not protest, just put his hands behind his back and let them cuff him. He had known this day would come eventually, had known from the moment he falsified those results that he would pay for it somehow. The only question had been when. The news broke within hours. Billionaire's uncle arrested for fraud. Corporate executive embezzled millions from niece's trust fund. DNA test scandal rocks. Manhattan elite. The story was too good for the media to ignore. Wealth, power, betrayal. A missing heir who had been alive all along. It was the kind of scandal that dominated headlines for weeks. John released a statement through his attorneys. It was brief and factual. He confirmed that his sister Emma had been found alive after 20 years missing, that she had been living in New York under an assumed identity, that Victor Blackwood had falsified DNA evidence to prevent her from claiming her inheritance, that criminal charges had been filed, and he was cooperating fully with federal authorities. He did not mention Lily by name, did not give details that would expose her to media scrutiny. She deserved privacy, deserved to process this revelation without cameras and reporters hounding her. John used his considerable influence to keep her identity protected. The woman in the story remained anonymous, just a sister found, just a family reunited. The trial came 3 months later. The courtroom in Lower Manhattan was packed with reporters and spectators who wanted to witness the fall of a corporate dynasty. Victor pleaded guilty to all charges, rather than face the evidence Daniel and Marcus had assembled. The financial forensics were too thorough. The testimony from Margaret Chen was too damaging. The genetic evidence was too conclusive. His lawyer negotiated a plea deal that got him 15 years in federal prison instead of 25. But before sentencing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. John stood first. He walked to the podium in a dark suit that made him look older than his 34 years. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 2 decades of grief. Your Honor, my uncle Victor Blackwood did not just steal money from my family. He stole time. He stole the opportunity for my sister and I to grow up together, to know our parents' legacy together, to share the burden of loss that has defined both our lives. For 20 years, I believed my sister was dead. I mourned her. I searched for her ghost. And all that time, she was alive and he knew it. He looked me in the eye every day and let me believe that lie because it protected his theft. That is not just fraud, that is cruelty. And it deserves the maximum penalty this court can impose. The courtroom was silent as John returned to his seat. Then Lily stood. She had not planned to speak, had thought she would let John represent them both. But as she sat listening to her brother describe 20 years of pain, she realized she had her own words that needed to be said. She walked to the podium with less confidence than John. She was not used to public speaking, not comfortable being the center of attention. But as she looked at Victor sitting at the defense table, refusing to meet her eyes, she found her voice. Your Honor, I do not remember being Emma Blackwood. I do not remember my parents, or my childhood, or the brother who spent 20 years searching for me. All of that was taken from me the night of the accident, but I remember being Lily Carter. I remember struggling to survive, working 3 jobs to pay for my mother's medical care, wondering every day who I was and where I came from. And when I finally found a clue, when I finally had a chance to learn my identity, this man lied to keep me from the truth. He falsified scientific evidence. He threatened the people I love. He tried to kill me and my mother in a fire because I asked questions he did not want answered. He did not just steal money. He stole my identity, my history, my family, and no sentence this court gives him will ever give me back what he took. When Lily sat down, there were tears on her face, but her voice had been steady, strong. She had spoken her truth, and the courtroom had heard it. Dr. Whitmore received 8 years for his role in the falsification. He stood in court and apologized, said he had made terrible choices driven by addiction and fear, said he hoped someday Emma Blackwood would forgive him for the years he had stolen from her family. Whether she would or not remained to be seen. The money from Emma's trust fund was recovered. The forensic accountants tracked down every dollar Victor had taken. Some had been spent. Some had been hidden in offshore accounts, but most of it was still there, waiting to be returned to its rightful owner. The trust fund that should have been worth over $100 million was restored to nearly that amount. John sat down with Lily in his attorney's office and explained the inheritance, explained that she was now wealthy beyond anything she had imagined, that she would never have to work again if she chose not to, that everything her parents had set aside for her was hers. Lily listened to the numbers with something like disbelief. $100 million. It was an amount so large she could not conceptualize it. She thought about Grace's medical bills, about the transplant that had cost $300,000 and nearly bankrupted them. That amount was a rounding error in the trust fund, less than 1% of what she now possessed. I want Grace taken care of, Lily said. She saved my life. She gave me everything when she had nothing. I want her to have a house, financial security, the best medical care available, everything. John nodded. Of course, whatever she needs. She has family too. And I want to set up a foundation for children in foster care. Kids who age out of the system without family. I want to help them the way Grace helped me. That is a good use of the money. I will help you set it up. They worked together over the following months. Brother and sister learning to be family. It was not easy. They were strangers in many ways, had different lives and different experiences and different values. But they were also connected by something deeper than experience, by blood and loss and the kind of bond that survives even when memory does not. Lily kept the name Lily Carter. She did not become Emma Blackwood again. That person was gone, buried by 2 decades and trauma she would never fully understand. But she added Blackwood to her legal documents. Lily Carter Blackwood, a hybrid identity that honored both her past and her present. She moved into a larger apartment with Grace, something nice but not ostentatious, a place that felt like a home instead of a showpiece. John offered to buy her a penthouse in Manhattan, offered to set her up in a place that matched her new wealth. But Lily refused. She did not need luxury. She needed familiarity, needed Grace close by, needed to stay grounded in the person she had been, even as she learned to be someone new. John accepted that. He did not push, did not demand, just made himself available. Invited her to family dinners at his penthouse. Introduced her to the parts of his life he wanted to share. Taught her about their parents through stories and photographs. Let her set the pace. Slowly, carefully, they built something that resembled a relationship. It was not the bond of siblings who had grown up together. Could never be that. But it was real. It was chosen. It was two people who had lost everything deciding to find each other again. On the 1-year anniversary of their reunion, John took Lily to the cemetery where their parents were buried. It was a private cemetery in Connecticut. Expensive and exclusive. The kind of place where wealthy families kept their dead close, but separate from common ground. The headstones were simple. Michael Blackwood, Catherine Blackwood, beloved husband and father, beloved wife and mother. There was a third stone beside them, smaller. It read Emma Blackwood, our little star forever 5, forever loved. That is your memorial stone, John said quietly. Uncle Victor had it placed here after you were declared legally dead. I used to come here on your birthday. Would sit and talk to you like you could hear me. Tell you about my life, about the company, about everything I wished you could have been part of. Lily stared at the stone with her name on it. It felt surreal, like looking at her own grave, like she had died and been resurrected. In a way, she had. Emma Blackwood had died that night in the car crash, and Lily Carter had been born in the ruins. Do you want me to remove it? John asked. Now that you are alive, it seems wrong to leave it there. No, leave it. Emma Blackwood did die that night. I am not her anymore. This stone can stay as a memorial to the girl I was, the girl neither of us will ever really know. They stood together in silence, two people mourning different things. John mourned the sister he lost, the childhood they never shared, the 20 years stolen by one man's greed. Lily mourned the parents she would never know, the life she could not remember, the version of herself that had been erased by trauma and time. But they also celebrated survival, celebrated being found, celebrated the fact that despite everything, despite all the years and distance and lies, they were standing here together, family, broken but healing, lost but found. As they walked back to the car, Lily's phone rang. It was Grace calling to remind her about dinner, asking what time she would be home, being a mother the way she had been for 20 years. Lily answered with a smile in her voice, told Grace she would be home soon, that John was driving her back to the city. When she hung up, John said, "She is a remarkable woman, Grace. What she did for you, raising you alone, fighting the system to adopt you, loving you when she had every reason not to, that takes a special kind of strength. She is the reason I am still here, the reason I survived. Without her, I would have been just another statistic, another foster kid lost in the system. I owe her everything," John said. "She kept my sister alive when I could not. That is a debt I can never repay. She does not want repayment. She wants to be part of my life, our life. That is all she has ever wanted. Then that is what she will have." The years that followed were not perfect. There were difficult conversations and painful memories and moments when the weight of the past threatened to crush them both. John struggled with guilt, with the knowledge that Emma had been so close and he had not found her, with rage at Victor that never quite faded even after his uncle was locked away. Lily struggled with identity, with feeling like she was living someone else's life, with the pressure of wealth and expectation, with loving Grace and John equally but differently, with being two people at once and neither completely. But they worked through it, together. With therapy and time and the stubborn determination that runs in families even when memory does not. They built traditions, weekly dinners that included Grace and Daniel, holidays spent together, birthdays celebrated with the kind of joy that comes from knowing how close you came to never having them. 5 years after the reunion, Lily used part of her trust fund to open a foundation for foster children, the Carter Blackwood Foundation. named for both the woman who raised her and the family she was born into. It provided resources for kids aging out of foster care, education funding, housing assistance, mental health support, everything Lily wished she had access to growing up. Grace served on the board, used her experience navigating the system to help kids who were facing the same struggles she and Lily had faced. John provided business expertise and connections, opened doors that would have stayed closed. Together, they built something that mattered, something that turned tragedy into purpose. Daniel retired from corporate security and went to work for the foundation. His skills in investigation and protection were better used helping vulnerable kids than protecting corporate assets. He had found his sister, had helped John find his. Now he spent his time making sure other families got the same chance. On a warm evening in June, 7 years after the glass shattered in the restaurant, the foundation held its annual gala. The event was packed with donors and supporters and success stories. Kids who had gone through the program and were now thriving. Families who had been reunited. Lives that had been changed. Lily stood on the stage in a simple black dress and looked out at the crowd. Grace sat in the front row beside John, both of them smiling with pride. 7 years ago, Lily had been a waitress struggling to survive. Now she was here, using her wealth and her story to help others, turning pain into purpose. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the birthmark that had triggered everything, the locket that had provided proof, the DNA test that had lied and the one that had told the truth, the investigation that had risked everything, the reunion that had healed wounds she did not know she carried. She thought about Victor in his prison cell, about the choices he had made and the price he had paid, about how one man's greed had stolen 20 years but had not destroyed the bond between siblings, about how truth, no matter how long buried, eventually finds its way back to the light. As she began to speak, telling the crowd about the importance of family and identity and belonging, she saw John lean over and whisper something to Grace, saw Grace laugh and squeeze his hand, saw two people who loved her in different ways but with equal intensity, saw the family she had built from the ashes of the family she lost. And she understood finally that she was not Lily Carter or Emma Blackwood. She was both. She was all of it. The girl who was lost and the woman who was found. The waitress and the heiress. The orphan and the sister. She was a story of survival and reunion, and the stubborn refusal to let tragedy have the final word. When the gala ended and the guests departed, Lily stood with John and Grace and Daniel on the steps of the venue. The city stretched out before them, glittering and vast. The same city where she had served tables and he had built empires. The same city that had kept them separated and brought them back together. "Thank you," Lily said to all of them, "for not giving up, for fighting for the truth, for finding me." "We did not find you," John said. "You found us. You were the one who kept looking when the DNA test said to stop. You were the one who refused to accept the lie. You saved yourself. We just helped." Grace put her arm around Lily's shoulders. "And now we keep going, together, however long we have, whatever comes next. Together." They stood together as the city lights turned on one by one. 4 people who had been broken by loss and put back together by truth. A family not defined by DNA or memory, but by choice and loyalty and love that endured even when everything else was taken away. Somewhere in the night, the melody of a lullaby hummed on the wind, a song that had survived 20 years and an ocean of grief. A song that had led a lost girl home. And in that moment, standing together under the stars, they were finally whole.